I stopped by my husband's office before our daughter's recital to bring the ballet shoes she had forgotten at home. But outside the conference room, I saw him holding his mistress as he whispered, "Tonight is her recital. I still have to show up and play the good father." She asked softly, "What about your wife?" He laughed and said, "After the Malibu project launch, she'll lose everything, even the little girl." I quietly turned on my recorder, and in that moment I began planning the destruction of his entire empire. I'm truly glad you're here for this story. Before we dive in, drop a quick comment for me. Is it morning, afternoon, or late night? Where you are right now, I read every single response. Just a quick note. Some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. What truly matters is the message it carries. I remember the exact moment I stopped being a wife and became an architect of revenge. It was 3 p.m. on October 10th, standing outside my husband's office with my daughter's ballet slippers in one hand. The slippers were pale pink satin size 3, forgotten on the kitchen counter that morning. Ivy's recital started at 6:30 p.m., and I knew she'd panic without them. I was 32 years old, a luxury resort architect whose blueprint for the $250 million Malibu Cliff Resort had been presented to the board under my husband's name 6 weeks earlier. At the time, I told myself it was strategic, we were a team, and Desmond Prescott, 38 CEO of Prescott Development, had the client relationships to secure funding. My designs, his execution. Partnership. The executive corridor smelled like polished mahogany and expensive cologne. My heels clicked against Italian marble as I approached the corner office rehearsing my interruption. "Just dropping these off, see you tonight." But the conference room door stood slightly ajar and voices drifted through the gap. "Tonight I still have to go home and play the devoted father," Desmond said, his voice carrying that practiced charm he used on investors. I froze 3 feet from the door. A woman laughed light familiar. "The recital, I forgot. Family is just the core brand image we must maintain," he continued, and I heard ice cubes chiming against crystal. Prescott Development's CEO with the architect wife and the ballet daughter. It sells trust, legacy, stability. The pink satin slippers suddenly weighed nothing in my hand. Everything weighed nothing. "She'll never know she's too busy being the perfect wife," he added. I should have burst through that door. I should have screamed, thrown something, demanded an explanation. Instead, something colder took over the part of me that had designed the load-bearing structures for $100 million resorts, the part that knew exactly how to blueprint a demolition. I moved silently to the adjacent glass-walled meeting room. The lights were off, but through the transparent partition, I had a clear sightline into Desmond's conference space. He stood by the windows, scotch in hand, tie loosened, and beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched, stood Vivian Ballard, 26 years old, project coordinator. The young woman whose design proposals I had personally refined over coffee 3 months ago, teaching her how to pitch sustainable materials to cost-obsessed developers. She wore a navy dress I'd complimented last week. Vivian leaned into him, her hand sliding up his arm. "When can we stop hiding?" "Soon." Desmond set down his glass and turned to face her fully. "Just let me manage the optics. The Malibu project launches New Year's Eve, massive global event, career-defining. After that, I can restructure everything. She'll be too humiliated to fight the divorce terms, and you'll have exactly what you want." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even shake. Something arctic and precise crystallized in my chest, the same methodical focus that calculated square footage and stress loads, now calculating something else entirely. Through the glass, I watched Vivian kiss my husband, watched his hands settle on her waist with obvious familiarity. This wasn't new, this wasn't a mistake. This was planned. My phone was already in my hand. I opened the recording app finger steady and positioned the microphone toward the gap in the conference room door. Red dot recording. "Family is the brand's sweetheart," Desmond was saying, his voice dropping to that intimate tone I recognized from our own early years. "You just need to stay in the shadows a little longer. After New Year's, we'll have everything the Malibu contract secured, the investors locked, the board eating out of my hand. Then I can finally be with you properly." 17 seconds. That's how long I recorded before Vivian's phone buzzed and she stepped away checking the screen. 17 seconds of my husband commodifying our 8-year marriage, our daughter's childhood, the architectural work I'd poured my soul into. 17 seconds that would eventually dismantle a $250 million empire. But I didn't know that yet. I saved the file, titled it October underscore 10 underscore evidence underscore 01, and slipped the phone back into my coat pocket. My hands didn't tremble. The ballet slippers sat in my tote bag, tangible proof of the devoted mother performance Desmond would deliver tonight. How long had I been the backdrop to his performance? How many investor dinners, charity galas, and client presentations had I attended as his asset, his proof of stability, his brand management? I thought about the Malibu project, my sustainable cliffside design that maximized ocean views while minimizing environmental impact. The innovative water reclamation system I'd spent 6 months perfecting, the client pitch deck I'd written that Desmond had delivered verbatim without crediting a single line to me. He'd told me it was strategy, team effort, our shared success. Now I understood. I wasn't his partner. I was his blueprint, his brand, his foundation. And he was preparing to demolish me right after he finished using my last design to secure his legacy project. Through the glass, Vivian gathered her tablet and leather folio, kissed Desmond once more, and headed toward the door. I stepped back into the shadows of the darkened meeting room, watching her heels click past without a glance in my direction. She smoothed her hair, checked her lipstick in a compact mirror, and disappeared toward the elevators, humming something light and carefree. Desmond remained by the window, scrolling through his phone. I could have walked in, could have confronted him with the pink ballet slippers still clutched in my bag, asked him to explain the words I'd just recorded. But architects don't demolish buildings with hammers and rage. They study the structural plans, identify the load-bearing pillars, and remove them with surgical precision. I slipped the ballet slippers into my tote bag and walked toward the elevator, my heels clicking on marble with perfect composure. In my coat pocket, my phone held 17 seconds that would eventually erase everything he'd built on my back. But first, I had a recital to attend and a devoted mother to play. Because if he could perform, so could I. The recording stayed in my coat pocket through the entire drive uptown, a digital grenade with a 17-second fuse. By the time I reached the ballet theater on the Upper West Side, I had already made my decision. Ivy would never know her childhood was being weaponized. My daughter spun across the stage in her white tutu, and all I could think was, I will burn his empire to ash before I let him use her as a prop in his performance. Ivy was 8 years old with my dark eyes and her father's effortless charm, and she had no idea the pink satin slippers on her feet had been the catalyst for everything that would come next. She pirouetted under the stage lights, arms lifted in perfect form, face radiant with concentration. Around me, parents applauded and filmed on their phones. I clapped too, my hands moving on autopilot while my mind cataloged evidence, constructed timelines, blueprinted a demolition. "Mommy, did you see my pirouette?" Ivy rushed to me after her curtain call, still breathless, tutu bouncing. "I saw every second, sweetheart. You were perfect." She hugged me with the unself-conscious intensity only 8-year-olds possess, and something sharp lodged in my throat. This child, this bright, trusting child, would become collateral damage in a messy divorce if I moved too quickly. Desmond would use her in court leverage custody for better terms, parade her in front of cameras as proof he was the stable parent. I'd watched it happen to colleagues, friends, women who thought the legal system would protect them. I would not let that happen to Ivy, which meant I couldn't just divorce him. I had to dismantle him so completely that he'd have nothing left to fight with. Colleen Whitaker, the ballet instructor who'd taught at the studio for 30 years, touched my shoulder as parents filtered out. "Ivy's really blossoming. You should be so proud." "I am," I said, smiling with every muscle in my face except my eyes. Colleen had no idea her studio security camera had captured Vivian Ballard picking up Desmond 3 weeks ago for what they'd called a site visit. I'd checked the footage timestamp this morning before I knew what I was looking for. Now I did. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket right where the recording lived. Desmond's text glowed across the screen. "Internal stream tonight. Need you standing beside me. Perfect family portrait." Perfect family portrait, brand management, the core image we must maintain. I typed back, of course, what time? The applause around me sounded like static. I was already somewhere else, somewhere colder, sharper, where architects don't design buildings. They design demolitions. And I'd spent 12 years learning how to identify load-bearing structures, the precise points where pressure creates catastrophic failure. Desmond thought I was the decorative element. He was about to learn I was the foundation. By the time we returned to the penthouse at 8:47 p.m., Ivy was half asleep against my shoulder in the back of the car. I carried her upstairs, changed her into pajamas, kissed her forehead, and whispered the same words I said every night. Mommy loves you more than anything in this world. She mumbled something about tutus and drifted off. I closed her bedroom door and walked to my office, the small converted study Desmond had given me years ago with patronizing generosity as if I were a child who needed a playroom. My laptop sat on the antique desk his mother had donated from the Hamptons estate. I opened an encrypted browser, navigated to a secure email portal, and typed 3 words to Thane Dalton, the college friend who'd become Manhattan's most feared divorce attorney. Need meeting, absolute confidentiality. Thane was 35, relentless in court, and the only person I trusted with what I was about to do. We'd stayed close after graduation, occasional dinners, holiday cards, the kind of friendship that survives distance through mutual respect. He answered within seconds. Then I created a new folder on an offline hard drive, the kind without cloud backup or digital fingerprints. I labeled it Malibu_evidence. Inside, I created 7 subfolders: audio, financial communications, contracts, testimony, timeline, legal. The October 10th recording went into audio, renamed with timestamp and location metadata. 17 seconds. Not enough to prove anything in court yet, but enough to establish pattern. I would need more. Financial records, text messages, witness statements. The kind of comprehensive documentation that doesn't just win divorces, it destroys opposing counsel before they can mount a defense. How many times had he looked at me like this, grateful, trusting, while planning his next lie? How many times had I smiled back, played the supportive wife, never questioning why my architectural designs were presented under his name, why client meetings happened without me, why the Malibu project I'd conceived from sustainable materials research had become his career-defining achievement. I heard his footsteps in the hallway, the confident stride of a man who believed himself untouchable. The office door opened. Desmond stood there in his tailored suit tie, loosened scotch in hand. The same scotch he'd been drinking this afternoon, while telling Vivian Ballard that I'd be too humiliated to fight the divorce terms. Working late again. I closed the laptop with a soft click, turning to face him with the expression I'd perfected over 8 years of marriage, concerned, affectionate, slightly worried about his health. You push yourself too hard. Big things coming, he said, crossing to kiss my forehead. The same mouth that had kissed Vivian 6 hours ago. The Malibu launch is going to change everything for us, for the firm, for Ivy's future. Us. As if we were a team. As if he hadn't stolen my intellectual property and planned to discard me the moment it secured his legacy. I stood, placed my hand on his chest, and looked up at him with perfect wifely devotion. I'm so incredibly proud of what you've built, honey. The lie tasted like copper on my tongue, but my voice stayed steady. Behind me, the laptop contained the first entry in an evidence folder that would eventually hold enough documentation to erase his empire. In my email, an encrypted message waited for the attorney who would help me execute the plan with surgical precision. Desmond smiled, believing every word. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Sask. I mean that. I know, I whispered. My phone buzzed softly in my palm. Thane's reply 3 seconds after I'd sent the message. Tomorrow 9 a.m. My office. Bring everything. I locked the screen and slid into bed beside my husband, who had no idea the countdown had already begun. By morning, I would stop being a wife and become a strategist. Morning came with the precision of a surgical blade. By 9 a.m. on October 14th, I sat across from Thane Dalton in his office at the Core Club in Midtown, the 17-second recording cued on my phone, and a leather portfolio containing the original Malibu concept Bible resting on my lap. Thane slid a single page across his mahogany desk and asked the question that would reshape everything. Do you want to win a settlement, or do you want to erase him from the industry? The paper was old, 6 years old to be precise. The original incorporation filing for Prescott Development Group back when Desmond had still been his father's employee, and I'd been the naive architect who believed in partnership. I scanned the dense legal language, the standard boilerplate about equity distribution and governance structure until Thane's finger landed on clause 7.3 buried in the middle of page 4. This clause, he said, his voice carrying the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd found exactly what he was looking for. Did you insist on this when you signed? I read it twice. Any concept design Bible or intellectual property created by Saskia Marie Townsend prior to the official corporate registration date of Prescott Development Group remains her absolute personal property in perpetuity, regardless of subsequent corporate association or marital status. I did, I said slowly, the memory surfacing like evidence from deep water. Desmond laughed, said we'd never divorce, called me paranoid for wanting it. Thane leaned back in his chair, his expression somewhere between admiration and predatory focus. Then he just handed you the nuclear option. The Malibu Concept Bible. All 347 pages of sustainable design specifications, environmental impact assessments, client pitch materials, and architectural renderings had been finalized on March 3rd, 3 months before Prescott Development Group's official incorporation date of June 7th. I'd spent 18 months developing that concept on nights and weekends, refining every detail, while Desmond worked his day job at his father's firm. When we'd finally launched our own company, he'd presented Malibu to the board as his vision. Our vision, he'd said. Our future. But legally, it was mine. Every blueprint, every sustainability metric, every client relationship built on my architectural innovations. Mine. I'd spent 6 years thinking I was holding a handful of cards. Thane had just shown me I'd been holding the entire deck. If you filed for divorce today and claimed full IP ownership, Thane continued, his voice clinical and precise, he'd lose the Malibu project entirely. The board would have to choose between keeping you or keeping him, and you're the one who actually created the asset they're about to invest $250 million into. The office smelled like leather and old money. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched out below us, a city built by people who understood that empires rose and fell on the strength of their foundations. I'd been Desmond's foundation for 8 years. He'd built his entire empire on intellectual property I'd designed and then legally protected for myself without even realizing it. I don't want a settlement, I said quietly. I want him to understand exactly what he stole, and I want it back. Thane smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Then we're going to need more than 17 seconds of audio and a pre-incorporation clause. We're going to need a complete financial picture. 4 days later, working in my home office while Desmond attended an investor dinner downtown, I found it. The foundation appeared innocuous at first. The Ivy Prescott Arts and Education Foundation, registered in Delaware, ostensibly created to fund youth programs and cultural initiatives. Desmond had mentioned it casually 6 months ago, framed as a charitable tax strategy that would benefit our daughter's legacy. I'd signed the paperwork without reading it carefully, trusting that my husband wasn't using our 8-year-old daughter's name for anything except genuine philanthropy. I'd been wrong. The financial records told a different story. Wire transfers, massive and frequent, routed from Malibu project procurement accounts through 3 layers of offshore shell companies before landing in the foundation. Not thousands, millions. And none of it was going to youth programs or cultural initiatives. It was sitting in investment accounts accumulating interest, waiting. For what? For him to access after the divorce, after he'd painted me as an unfit mother, and secured full custody after he'd legally separated me from any claim to Ivy's assets. He was using our daughter, our 8-year-old daughter, as a shell corporation. The rage that rose in my throat tasted like copper, but I swallowed it whole. Rage was useless. Evidence was everything. I took screenshots, downloaded statements, created a new subfolder in Malibu_evidence labeled financial_fraud_child_exploitation. Then, the notification appeared in the corner of my screen, new document shared. Proposed psychological evaluation protocol, household wellness. I opened it with steady hands, already knowing what I'd find. A clinical proposal professionally formatted recommending comprehensive psychological assessment of all household members to ensure optimal child development environment. The language was careful, neutral, concerned. But between the lines, I could read the real message. Saskia Townsend exhibits signs of emotional instability, withdrawal, and potential depression that may impact child welfare. They'd need evidence for that. Recordings, observations, testimony from people close to the family who could attest to my declining mental state. How long had he been documenting me? How many moments of exhaustion, grief, or frustration had been captured and cataloged as proof of instability? I picked up my phone and called Thane on the encrypted line. "He's laundering millions through our daughter's name," I said without preamble. "And the psychological evaluation protocol. He's building a custody case, painting me as unstable." Thane was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then we accelerate. No more slow documentation. We move fast, we move clean, and we move before he realizes you're not the compliant wife he thinks you are." I stared at the psychological evaluation protocol notification, my cursor hovering over the file. Desmond wasn't just stealing my work and laundering money, he was constructing a cage brick by brick to trap me in the role of unfit mother, while he walked away clean with everything: my intellectual property, my daughter, and millions in hidden assets. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated what a mother would do to protect her child, and I was about to show him exactly how far I'd go. The first step was simple: find out exactly what weapons he'd built to use against me. I heard my own voice at 2:47 a.m. on October 20th. "I can't do this anymore, I just can't." Carefully extracted from the night Ivy had pneumonia, and I'd been awake for 36 hours straight now, edited into a curated playlist titled Evidence underscore instability underscore SLT underscore V3 dot MP4. Desmond slept 3 feet away from me in our king-sized bed, breathing the deep, untroubled rhythm of a man who believed himself untouchable. His laptop sat on the nightstand, unlocked the screensaver, cycling through family photos: our wedding in the Hamptons, Ivy's first birthday, last summer's vacation in Provence. Perfect family portrait. Brand management. I'd waited until 1:30 a.m. to be certain he was deeply asleep. Then I'd slipped out of bed, retrieved his backup drive from the false bottom of his desk drawer, the one he thought I didn't know about, and connected it to my own encrypted laptop in the walk-in closet. The folder structure was methodical. Clinical. Custody underscore case. Underscore materials. Greater than audio. Underscore evidence. Greater than instability. Underscore documentation. Inside, dozens of files, each carefully labeled with date, time, and emotional context. My voice crying when my father died 2 years ago. I don't know how to keep going. I feel like I'm drowning. My voice exhausted during Ivy's illness. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe I've always been the problem. My voice from a private therapy session I'd done via phone while he was supposedly at a client meeting. I don't know how much longer I can pretend everything is fine. He'd been recording me for years. Every vulnerable moment, every private breakdown, every therapeutic confession, captured, cataloged, edited into evidence that I was mentally unstable, emotionally volatile, unfit to raise our daughter. The files had metadata, timestamps, professional editing software signatures. This wasn't opportunistic documentation. This was systematic psychological warfare. I wanted to vomit. I wanted to wake him up and scream. Instead, I took screenshots of every folder, every file name, every timestamp. I copied the entire directory structure to my own encrypted drive, and I made a silent vow that echoed in the darkness of that closet: never shed a single tear within range of his devices, ever again. How many intimate moments had he weaponized while I thought we were building a life together? How many times had I sought comfort from my husband while he was collecting ammunition? I deleted nothing, changed nothing. Closed his laptop, returned the backup drive to its hiding place, and slid back into bed beside him at 3:17 a.m. He stirred, reaching for me in his sleep, and I let him pull me close while my mind cataloged evidence and constructed countermeasures. 3 days later, I sat across from Boyd Fleming in a dim midtown bar that smelled like stale beer and desperation. Boyd was 48, recently terminated as head of IT for Prescott Development, and he looked like a man who'd been waiting for someone to ask the right questions. He made me delete the backup logs, Boyd said quietly, nursing a whiskey that looked like it wasn't his first. Server access records, security camera feeds, root level timestamps, everything that would show who actually uploaded what files and when. Told me it was routine security protocol. Gave me a severance package and an NDA. But you kept a copy, I said, not a question. Boyd's smile was bitter. I've worked in corporate IT for 23 years. I know what routine security protocol looks like, and I know what covering tracks looks like. So, yeah, I kept a copy. Air-gapped drive, offline storage, encrypted 6 ways from Sunday, personal insurance. What do you need from me? He looked at me for a long moment, and I could see him making calculations, weighing risks against potential outcomes. Finally, legal protection, in writing. And when this goes public, I want my name cleared. I want it on record that I was terminated for refusing to participate in fraud, not for cause. I slid a business card across the table, Thane's contact information printed on heavy stock that practically screamed expensive legal representation. Call this number tomorrow morning. Tell him exactly what you told me. He'll draft the immunity agreement. Boyd pocketed the card. The logs show everything. Every file Vivian Ballard accessed, every unauthorized export, every deletion. All of it timestamped and attributed to her credentials. All of it. Every single fraudulent transaction. I thought about Vivienne, 26 years old, ambitious, sleeping with a man who'd positioned her perfectly to take the fall for crimes she probably didn't even know she was committing. 2 days later, on October 25th, I sat in my home office with the door locked, speaking to Leonie Hart on an encrypted line. Leonie was 29, my former assistant who'd moved to a competitor firm 6 months ago, but had kept every original sketch, every design iteration, every email timestamp proving who truly created the Malibu concept, every file deletion, every unauthorized export. It all traces back to Vivian's login. Leonie said, her voice carrying the careful precision of someone who understood she was handling evidence. The original design files you created, deleted from the shared server at 1:17 a.m. on October 10th, deleted using her credentials. Then sanitized versions uploaded 30 minutes later with modified metadata showing Desmond as primary author. October 10th. The same day I discovered the affair. The same day he'd been in that conference room with Vivian planning my humiliation. She doesn't know, does she? I asked quietly. Leonie's laugh was hollow. She thinks she's the chosen one. She has no idea she's the designated defendant. The pieces assembled themselves with crystalline clarity. Vivian wasn't hired because Desmond loved her. She was hired because he needed someone young, ambitious, and naive enough to use their credentials without questioning why. Every stolen design file, every fraudulent document, every unauthorized IP transfer, all of it routed through her system, leaving digital fingerprints that would lead investigators directly to her, while Desmond stood back, shocked and betrayed by his trusted employee's criminal behavior. He wasn't just a cheating husband. He was an architect of ruin who blueprinted his exits before laying the foundation. He'd constructed an elaborate machine designed to destroy 2 women, simultaneously strip me of custody using fabricated psychological evidence, then sacrifice his mistress to federal authorities as the criminal who'd stolen my intellectual property. Perfect symmetry, perfect deniability, perfect escape. Except he'd made one critical error. I closed the encrypted call and opened a new file on my desktop, typing slowly, deliberately. Operation_self-inflicted. Desmond had spent years constructing an elaborate machine designed to destroy 2 women simultaneously, his wife and his mistress. But every machine has a fatal flaw. The person who built it believes they understand every moving part. He'd forgotten that I was an architect too. Architects don't just design buildings, we design outcomes. And I'd spent the last 18 days designing Desmond's systematic destruction with the same methodical precision I'd once used to design his empire. The storage unit smelled like old ink and cold concrete when Leonie handed me the single most dangerous document in Desmond's world, the original Malibu Concept Bible dated March 15, 2019, 4 months before Prescott Development Group legally existed. I kept 3 copies, Leonie said quietly, her breath fogging in the climate-controlled air of the lower Manhattan facility. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sharp shadows across row after row of blueprint storage cabinets. One in my safe deposit box, one with my attorney, and this one. I knew you'd need it eventually. The binder was heavy, 347 pages of architectural renderings, material specifications, environmental impact assessments, client demographic profiles, and site analysis. Every page bore my personal design seal. Every page was stamped with completion dates spanning March through May 2019. And every single page predated the legal incorporation of Desmond's company by 4 months. I opened to the title page Malibu Cliff Resort, Sustainable Luxury Development. Concept Bible. Principal Architect Saskia Marie Townsend. Finalized May 7, 2019. Prescott Development Group's incorporation filing was dated September 12, 2019. Every page is stamped with your personal seal and dated months before incorporation. Leonie said, watching me turn through documentation I'd nearly forgotten existed. The pre-incorporation IP clause Thane found, this is what it was protecting. You created the entire vision before his company had legal existence. I traced my finger across a rendering I'd spent 6 weeks perfecting the curved glass facade that maximized ocean views while minimizing solar heat, gained the innovative water reclamation system that made the resort carbon neutral, the indigenous landscaping that preserved the coastal ecosystem. I'd designed this late at night in our old apartment when Desmond was still working for his father and dreaming of independence. I'd believed we were building something together. He's been selling your vision as his masterpiece for 6 years, Leonie continued, and her voice carried an edge I recognized, the particular anger that comes from watching someone steal credit for work you helped protect. I was holding the blueprints to a $250 million building, but what I really held was the demolition plan for a man who thought he owned my work. Every page was ammunition. Every date stamp was evidence. Every specification proved that the empire Desmond built, the board, presentations, the investor pitches, the media coverage calling him a visionary. All of it rested on intellectual property he'd never legally controlled. The IP clause gives me ownership, I said slowly. But this proves creation timeline. If I filed IP theft charges, the entire project would freeze pending investigation. More than freeze, Leonie corrected. Federal compliance protocols would trigger immediately. Investors would pull funding. The board would demand full audit. Desmond wouldn't just lose Malibu, he'd lose everything. I closed the binder carefully, the weight of it solid and real in my hands. Thank you for keeping this safe. I kept it for you, she said simply. I watched him present your work for 3 years before I left. I knew eventually you'd realize what he was. 3 days later, I sat across from Thane in his private banking suite overlooking Central Park. October 31st had arrived with sharp autumn light that turned the park into a patchwork of gold and crimson. The city sprawled below us, millions of people conducting their lives unaware that 12 floors above them, a woman was planning to collapse a corporate empire. The Concept Bible establishes legal ownership, Thane said, reviewing the documentation I'd provided. But triggering the collapse requires strategic precision. If we move too early, Desmond can spin damage control, restructure assets, position himself as the victim of a vindictive spouse. Then when we've identified every choke point in his infrastructure and positioned ourselves to cut them all simultaneously. Thane pulled up a financial flowchart on his monitor, a complex web of capital sources, investment vehicles, and funding pipelines that kept the Malibu project alive. Malcolm Kingsley controls $180 million in Malibu funding. He's the oxygen. Without Kingsley's institutional capital, the entire project suffocates. I studied the chart. Malcolm Kingsley, 61 managing partner at Kingsley Capital Management, sat at the center of a web that connected pension funds, sovereign wealth, and family offices to Desmond's development pipeline. One man, One massive capital commitment. One conversation away from pulling the plug. If we approach him too early, Desmond can spin the narrative, Thane continued. Paint you as an embittered spouse making false claims. Malcolm is a businessman he'll side with whoever presents the most credible story backed by the most compelling evidence. So we wait. We wait. When the stage is fully set, when we have financial documentation, witness testimony, forensic proof of fraud, and public momentum, we cut the air supply in one conversation. Malcolm hears about IP theft, money laundering, and federal investigations simultaneously. His compliance officers will freeze the funding before Desmond can even schedule a meeting. Thane's words hung in the air like a scalpel over an artery, one precise cut, and the entire organism bleeds out. How long? I asked. December. After we've secured the IT logs from Boyd, after we've documented the custody manipulation, after we've positioned every piece of evidence where it needs to be. Then we approach Malcolm, and the empire collapses in 48 hours. I stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. Central Park stretched below the sheep meadow, dotted with people enjoying the unseasonably warm afternoon. Malcolm Kingsley's office was 12 blocks south. I could see the building from here, glass and steel reflecting autumn sunlight. One phone call could end this today. One meeting, one presentation of the concept Bible and pre-incorporation clause 1, conversation with the man who controlled Desmond's oxygen supply. The empire would collapse before dinner. But I wasn't building the quick collapse. I was engineering a public execution, and executions require an audience. They require witnesses' documentation and the kind of systematic destruction that leaves no possibility of resurrection. Desmond had spent 6 years building his empire on my stolen work. I would spend 6 weeks dismantling it with surgical precision. First, I said quietly, still watching the city below, I need to survive Thanksgiving dinner with the family that's about to lose everything. Surviving the Prescott family required the same skills as surviving corporate warfare. Perfect posture, impeccable timing, and the ability to smile while someone tries to destroy you with paperwork. The Prescott family dining table was a battlefield dressed in white linen and sterling silver, and Eleanor Prescott, 76 and sharp as a scalpel, had just slid a document across the tablecloth toward me, like a declaration of war. A supplemental NDA, she said, her voice carrying the crisp authority of someone accustomed to immediate compliance. The Prescott estate dining room smelled like roasted duck and old money crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across ancestral portraits. Simply a formality to protect Ivy's inheritance from any future complications. I glanced at the document without touching it. Non-disclosure agreement. Supplemental family protection clause. The language was dense, but the intent was crystal sign, away my right to speak publicly about any aspect of Prescott family business, corporate dealings, or personal matters in perpetuity. Violate it and forfeit all claims to marital assets and Ivy's trust fund. The family legacy requires absolute stability, Eleanor continued, cutting her duck with surgical precision. You understand that, don't you, dear, with the Malibu launch approaching, we simply cannot afford any disruptions. Across the table, Desmond watched with studied neutrality, playing the dutiful son, while his mother did the dirty work. Ivy sat between us, oblivious, pushing roasted vegetables around her plate with 8-year-old determination to avoid anything green. Eleanor wielded ND. As the way other grandmothers wielded recipes, both were supposed to hold families together, but only one could be weaponized in court. I keep quiet for my daughter's peace, Eleanor, I said evenly, meeting her gaze without flinching. Not for your stock value. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Eleanor's fork paused mid-air. Desmond's expression flickered surprise, then calculation. He'd never heard me speak to his mother like that. The compliant wife, the perfect daughter-in-law, didn't challenge the matriarch at her own table. But I wasn't that wife anymore. That is enough. The voice came from the head of the table, rough as gravel, absolute as a judge's gavel. Walter Prescott, 80 years old and still sharp as broken glass, had been silent through 3 courses. Now every head turned toward him. Leave her alone. Eleanor's mouth thinned. Father, the legal team recommended. I said enough. Walter's eyes, pale blue and unforgiving, fixed on his daughter-in-law, with the same assessment he'd once used to evaluate million-dollar construction projects. The girl has been nothing but loyal to this family for 8 years. She doesn't need to sign away her voice to prove it. Eleanor withdrew the document with practiced grace, but her expression promised this conversation wasn't finished, just postponed. Dinner concluded with dessert and coffee. Ivy was dispatched to the library with her tablet. Desmond excused himself to take an urgent call. Probably Vivian, probably lies. I prepared to leave, gathering my coat from the foyer, when Walter's voice stopped me. "A word, in my study." It wasn't a request. Walter's private study smelled like old tobacco and leather-bound ledgers, the scent of deals made and fortunes built through calculated ruthlessness. He closed the heavy oak door behind us and moved to an antique safe, built into the wall, spinning the combination with practiced precision. "You didn't sign the NDA," he said, not looking at me. "No." Smart. Eleanor thinks in terms of containment. I think in terms of leverage. He withdrew a folder from the safe, set it on his desk. "I control 18% of Prescott Development's core voting shares, the exact margin required to remove a sitting CEO." The air left my lungs. Walter turned to face me fully, and I saw what I'd missed at dinner. This man knew something. Maybe not everything, but enough to understand that the perfect family portrait was fracturing. "My son," he continued, "has become reckless. I've seen the preliminary audit reports. I've heard whispers about irregularities in the Malibu procurement accounts. And I've watched you, Saskia, transform from a woman who loved my son into someone who measures every word like she's building a legal case." "Walter, let me finish." He opened the folder, revealing stock certificates, proxy documents, legal instruments of corporate control. "I built this firm from nothing. 43 years of my life went into creating something that would outlive me. I will not watch my son destroy it through greed or stupidity." This 80-year-old man had just offered me the key to his son's destruction, and the price wasn't money or revenge. It was the promise that his granddaughter would walk away unbroken. "Can you protect my granddaughter from the firestorm you're about to unleash?" Walter asked, his voice carrying no judgment, only brutal pragmatism. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "Ivy is my first priority. She always has been." "Then here is my offer." Walter tapped the proxy documents. "Show me proof on December 31st. Systemic fraud, unassailable. The kind of evidence that makes federal prosecutors take notice. Bring me that, and prove to me that Ivy will be protected from public scandal, and I will fire my own son in front of the board." The clock on his mantle ticked in the silence, each second marking the distance between now and the deadline. "Why?" I asked quietly. "Because I've spent 43 years building an empire based on integrity, and I won't let a spoiled child with delusions of genius burn it down using stolen blueprints and fraud." Walter's expression hardened. "I know the Malibu Concept Bible was yours, Saskia. I've known since the first board presentation. I watched Desmond present architectural innovations. He couldn't explain sustainability metrics. He didn't understand design philosophy. He'd never demonstrated before. I'm old, not blind." He'd known for 6 years and said nothing. So why now? "Because now there's evidence, and now there's a choice between protecting my son and protecting my legacy. He's forced me to choose." Walter moved to the window, looking out at the estate grounds where Prescott generations had gathered for decades. "December 31st, Saskia. Bring me proof that my son committed fraud. Prove you can shield my granddaughter from the fallout, and I will execute the proxy vote that removes him from power." I thought about the concept Bible in my safe deposit box. Boyd's server logs, Leonie's documentation, Thane's strategy. 8 weeks to assemble everything into a case so airtight that an 80-year-old patriarch would publicly execute his only son. "I'll be there," I said. Walter closed the heavy iron safe with a decisive click and met my eyes with the cold assessment of a man who'd built empires and wasn't afraid to demolish one. "I will hold my breath until December 31st, Saskia. Do not disappoint me." I had 8 weeks to deliver proof that would make a grandfather destroy his only son. And Vivian Ballard was about to make that significantly easier. Vivian Ballard made her first critical mistake on November 6th. She forgot that women who survive by observation can detect even the smallest theft of identity. Vivian Ballard was wearing my perfume, the specific Chanel blend I'd custom ordered for 6 years, and when she spoke to the design team in the architectural studio, I heard my own vocal cadences reflected back like a funhouse mirror. The Malibu sustainability metrics need refinement, she was saying to two junior designers, her hand gesturing in the exact arc I used when explaining load calculations. We've always prioritized environmental impact over pure aesthetics. We. Always. As if she'd been part of the creative process instead of the 26-year-old coordinator who'd joined the firm 8 months ago. I stood in the doorway of the open studio space watching her perform. She'd styled her hair the way I wore mine, loose waves, professional, but not severe. Her blazer was the same cut I favored, charcoal gray with subtle tailoring. Even her posture mimicked mine, shoulders back, weight slightly forward, the stance of someone who commanded attention through competence rather than volume. But it was the perfume that made my skin crawl. That custom blend bergamot and white tea with subtle vanilla undertones was as personal as a signature. She'd either stolen a bottle from my office or asked Desmond what I wore. Either way, she'd crossed from affair into identity theft. Saskia, Vivian turned, her smile bright and confident. I was just reviewing our progress on the terrace specifications. Our progress, our work, our daughter. I stepped into the studio, my heels clicking against polished concrete, and smiled with the same professional warmth I'd perfected over a decade of client meetings. The junior designers shifted uncomfortably, sensing tension they couldn't name. I thought I'd pick up Ivy from ballet next Thursday. Vivian continued, her voice carrying just enough volume that the designers would hear. Give you a break. You work so hard. The maternal boundary, she'd finally crossed it. Every head in the studio turned toward me, waiting for the explosion. The scene, the emotional breakdown that would confirm whatever narrative Desmond had been building about the unstable wife. I met Vivian's eyes, young, ambitious, utterly convinced of her own invincibility, and delivered my response in a voice cold enough to frost glass. You'll do no such thing. Then I turned to the junior designers. The terrace specifications look excellent. Send the final revisions to my personal email by end of day. I walked out without another word, leaving Vivian's performance hanging in the air like smoke. Did she actually believe she could replace me? Or was this Desmond's script make the mistress so visible, so arrogant, that I'd explode publicly and hand him the unfit mother narrative on a silver platter? Either way, I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Let her greed expand. The bigger her shadow, the easier she is to hit. 3 days later, on November 9th, I stepped into the executive elevator at corporate headquarters at precisely 8:47 a.m. Clayton Mercer, 52, and CFO, for the past decade, entered 2 seconds before the doors closed, his attention buried in a tablet, displaying quarterly transaction authorizations. I'd seen Clayton at board meetings, holiday parties, firm celebrations. He had a reputation for meticulous financial management and absolute loyalty to Desmond. His signature appeared on every major transaction, every funding authorization, every wire transfer that kept the Prescott development empire running, including, I now knew, the fraudulent ones. We rode in silence for 3 floors. Then Clayton's thumb paused mid-scroll, his face draining of color as he stared at something on the screen. His hand trembled slightly, just enough that the tablet shook. I watched him in my peripheral vision, waiting. Did you? Clayton's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. Did you personally clear this transfer from Ivy's trust? I turned to face him fully. His tablet displayed a transaction authorization dated October 3rd, 3 weeks before I'd discovered the affair. Wire transfer $4.7 million routing from the Ivy Prescott Arts and Education Foundation through 2 shell companies to an offshore investment account. Signature line Clayton Mercer, CFO. Authorization reference IP_trust_disbursement_Q3. No, I said quietly, but I know who did. The elevator doors slid shut on the next floor before anyone could enter, sealing us in that small chrome box. I watched a 52-year-old man realize his entire career could end in a federal courtroom because he'd trusted the wrong CEO. He told me it was a legitimate restructuring, Clayton whispered. Tax optimization. He said you'd approved it. I approved nothing. Desmond forged my authorization and used your signature to launder money through our daughter's name. Federal prosecutors call that wire fraud, identity theft, and child exploitation. The mandatory minimum is 20 years. Clayton's reflection in the polished elevator wall showed a man watching his life collapse in real time. His signature was all over those transactions. His name would appear on every indictment. Desmond had positioned him perfectly, the loyal CFO who'd processed millions in fraudulent transfers, the perfect corporate scapegoat to sacrifice when federal investigators came asking questions. Just like Vivian, just like me. Desmond built escape routes by constructing sacrificial surrogates. "What do you need?" Clayton asked, his voice hollow. "I'm collecting enough ink to bring to the U.S. Attorney's Office, Clayton. When I do, I'll need a cooperating witness, someone who acted under false pretenses and came forward voluntarily. That person walks away with a cooperation agreement. The person who stays silent takes the fall alone." I kept my voice low, intimate, the kind of conversation that wouldn't register on security cameras as confrontation. "Stand behind me." The elevator reached the executive floor 37th corner offices, the altitude where power concentrated into decisions that affected hundreds of employees. Clayton stepped toward the opening doors, then stopped, turning back to meet my eyes. "How much time do I have?" he asked. I held his gaze, letting him see that I wasn't negotiating, wasn't bluffing, wasn't offering anything except a single lifeline to a man drowning in someone else's fraud. "Until December 31st. Use it wisely." The doors slid shut on his ashen face, leaving me alone in the descending elevator with the faint scent of fear and expensive cologne. I had just recruited my first corporate defector, and he held the keys to every fraudulent ledger in the empire. Clayton delivered the first batch of ledgers within 24 hours, encrypted files documenting every fraudulent wire transfer, every shell company transaction, every signature he'd authorized under false pretenses. But it was Boyd Fleming's server logs that revealed the true architecture of Desmond's escape plan. The file buried in Boyd Fleming's server logs was titled compliance_whistleblower_draft_v7.docs. And when I opened it at 11:47 p.m. on November 12th, I discovered that my husband had spent months engineering the perfect double murder. One mistress, one wife, both framed for crimes he committed. I sat in my home office with the door locked, Thane's face pixelated on an encrypted video call, and scrolled through 18 pages of meticulously drafted federal whistleblower complaint. The document was dated September 14th, 3 weeks before I'd discovered the affair, 5 weeks before I'd begun collecting evidence. Desmond had been building his exit strategy long before I'd even known I needed one. The complaint painted a compelling narrative. Vivian Ballard, ambitious project coordinator with system administrator access, had orchestrated a sophisticated embezzlement scheme spanning 14 months. Every fraudulent transfer from the Malibu procurement accounts traced back to her credentials. Every deleted file, every unauthorized export, every shell company transaction, all of it logged under her username, her IP address, her digital fingerprints. But the masterpiece was in the secondary evidence trail. Buried in Appendix C, supported by carefully curated email timestamps and edited security footage, the complaint suggested that I, Saskia Townsend, the architect wife with intimate knowledge of project budgets and procurement schedules, had been Vivian's accomplice. The document implied I'd helped route money through Ivy's trust fund as payment for keeping quiet about my husband's affair, positioning me as a scorned wife who'd turned criminal out of revenge. "He didn't just frame Vivian," Thane said quietly from the video screen. "He framed you as her accomplice." "Two birds, one filing," I said, my voice eerily calm. "We disappear into federal prison while he plays the betrayed victim. The CEO, whose trusted employee and unfaithful wife conspired to embezzle millions, leaving him shocked and heartbroken." The beauty of it was undeniable. If federal investigators came asking questions, Desmond could hand them this ready-made case with all evidence neatly packaged. Vivian's credentials on every crime, my architectural expertise connecting the dots, his own shocked cooperation with authorities. He'd walk away clean, probably secure a book deal about corporate betrayal, and rebuild his reputation as the wronged husband who'd been too trusting. I sat back from the screen, the blue light washing over my face, and felt something I hadn't allowed myself in weeks, pure, undiluted hatred for the man sleeping 30 feet away. There's more, Thane said. Look at the metadata. I opened the document properties. The file had been revised 7 times between September and November, each iteration refined by someone who understood exactly how federal prosecutors built cases. The author field was blank scrubbed clean, but the file path history showed it had originated from Desmond's personal laptop, the same one he used for encrypted calls with Vivian. He'd been refining this document while kissing me goodnight, editing the narrative that would destroy 2 women while Ivy slept down the hall, planning our systematic ruin with the same methodical precision I'd once admired when he pitched clients. We need to neutralize this, Thane said. If he files this complaint before we're ready, he won't. I was already opening a new browser window, navigating to a secure anonymous email service. Because I'm about to give him a much bigger problem. I'd spent 3 days researching Vivian Ballard's family structure through public records and professional networks. She had one sibling, Lorraine Ballard, 42, senior forensic accountant at a mid-size auditing firm in Brooklyn. Lorraine's professional profile listed specializations in fraud detection, embezzlement investigation, and white-collar criminal analysis. Perfect. I created a new anonymous account, attached screenshots of the whistleblower complaint with metadata intact, and drafted a message that would detonate Desmond's carefully constructed alliance from within. Your sister is being positioned as a federal scapegoat. See attached. A concerned party. Short, clinical, impossible to ignore. You're warning her, Thane asked, confusion crossing his face. I'm arming her. I reviewed the attachment one final time, every page of that complaint, showing Vivian as the designated criminal, every piece of fabricated evidence that would send a 26-year-old woman to federal prison for crimes her married boyfriend committed. Lorraine is a forensic accountant. She'll recognize manufactured evidence within 10 minutes. And when she shows this to Vivian, when that girl realizes she wasn't the chosen mistress, but the prepositioned fall guy, the alliance fractures, Thane finished. He'd built a legal guillotine with 2 blades, one for his mistress, one for his wife, and positioned himself as the executioner who could walk away claiming he'd been the victim all along. But guillotines require cooperation from the condemned, and I'd just handed one of them a mirror showing exactly how the blade would fall. What happens when Vivian panics? Thane asked. She'll confront Desmond, demand explanations. He'll try to convince her the document is fake, that I'm manipulating her, that he'd never betray her trust. I hovered my cursor over the send button. But Lorraine is a professional fraud investigator. She'll see the metadata, the timeline, the systematic construction. She'll know this isn't a fake, it's a contingency plan. And sisters protect each other even when one of them has made catastrophically bad choices. My phone buzzed softly on the desk, a notification from the baby monitor app. Ivy had rolled over in her sleep, her small form barely visible under the purple comforter I'd tucked around her 3 hours ago. 8 years old, innocent, being used as a prop in her father's manufactured criminal conspiracy. I hit send. The encryption protocol confirmed delivery at 12:03 a.m., routing the message through 3 proxy servers before landing in Lorraine Ballard's inbox. Somewhere in Brooklyn, a forensic accountant was about to open an attachment that would shatter her sister's illusions and hand me the one thing Desmond never anticipated: a mistress who knew she'd been set up to burn. By morning, I said quietly, watching the sent confirmation blink on screen, the enemy alliance will begin its collapse from within. The alliance began fracturing at 7:23 a.m. on November 13th, when Lorraine Ballard opened her email and discovered her younger sister was being positioned as a federal scapegoat. By evening, I was sitting across from another ghost of Desmond's past, learning just how deep his criminal pattern ran. Carlton Rhodes asked me a question over espresso in a dim Brooklyn trattoria. Do you want to expose an affair, or do you want to prove he's been running a criminal enterprise for 15 years? The restaurant smelled like garlic and old wine, red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, creating the kind of atmosphere where secrets felt safe. Carlton was 61, silver-haired and hollow-eyed, wearing a suit that had been expensive once, but now hung on him like evidence of better days. His hands trembled slightly as he slid a manila envelope across the scarred wooden table. 15 years ago. Carlton said, his voice carrying the careful precision of someone who'd rehearsed this story 1,000 times. Your husband used forged environmental impact reports to steal 47 acres of prime coastal development land from my company. The forgery made it look like I'd falsified safety studies to bypass wetland protections. The state revoked my licenses, my investors sued, my reputation was destroyed. I opened the envelope. Inside were 2 sets of documents: the original environmental studies Carlton's firm had commissioned, and the altered versions that had been submitted to state authorities bearing his company's letterhead. The differences were subtle, but devastating. Water table measurements changed by decimal points, endangered species, surveys missing entire populations, soil contamination readings sanitized to harmlessness. He didn't just steal the land, Carlton continued. He made it look like I falsified the reports. I spent 3 years fighting regulatory sanctions and another 5 rebuilding a career that never recovered. And Desmond? He built luxury condos on that coastal tract and sold them for $43 million. 15 years you've waited, I said quietly, studying the documents. Show me the original proof. Carlton pulled out a second envelope, this one containing notarized affidavits from the environmental engineering firm that had conducted the original studies, time-stamped field photographs with GPS coordinates, proving the data collection dates, and a forensic document analysis showing where Desmond's altered versions had been created using different software than the originals. I kept everything, Carlton said, because men like your husband don't stop at one crime. They perfect a formula and repeat it until someone finally has the resources to stop them. I looked at Carlton Rhodes, this broken man who'd waited 15 years for justice, and realized I wasn't just avenging myself anymore. I was the reckoning for every person Desmond had ever destroyed. What do you want in exchange? I asked. A front row seat, Carlton said simply. When you bring him down, I want to watch. This documentation proves systematic fraud spanning decades. I said, my mind already cataloging how this evidence would transform the case. A live stream without a criminal history is just a messy divorce. This makes him a racketeer. Carlton's smile was bitter but satisfied. Exactly. 3 days later, on November 18th, I sat in a 5-star hotel lounge overlooking Manhattan with Leonie Hart, executing the economic kill shot Desmond would never see coming. The lounge was all marble and leather floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city like a painting. Leonie had brought the client database I'd personally built over 6 years. Every ultra-high net worth contact who'd expressed interest in the Malibu project, every relationship I'd cultivated through architectural conferences and luxury development summits, every connection that made the resort viable. These 20 clients are the entire foundation of the Malibu brand, Leonie said, spreading contracts across the polished table. Saudi royalty, Silicon Valley founders, European old money. They represent 60% of projected revenue. I reviewed each contract carefully. The pre-incorporation IP clause meant I legally owned the Malibu concept. The client relationships had been built through my professional reputation, not Desmond's company. And the reservation agreements contained a provision I'd insisted on years ago: exclusive architectural consultation rights transferable to any entity controlled by the original designer, meaning I could move them, transfer them to Townsend Design Studio. I said, signing the authorization forms with steady hands. Effective immediately. Desmond thought he'd built a $250 million empire on my blueprints, but I'd just shown him the truth. He'd built a palace on sand and I controlled the tide. Leonie witnessed each signature, co-signed the transfers, and began the electronic filing process that would legally redirect these crown jewel clients to my independent studio before Desmond's legal team even knew to object. By the time he discovered the clients were gone, the transfers would be complete, binding, and absolutely legal. When will he realize? Leonie asked. Not until December, I said. When the quarterly revenue reports show the reservation pipeline has been gutted, by then it will be too late to stop the bleeding. My phone buzzed on this table. A text from Desmond, timed with the oblivious precision of a man who believed himself untouchable. Livestream rehearsal next week. Dress elegantly. We need the perfect family portrait. I stared at the message, letting the irony wash over me in waves. He was summoning me to a rehearsal for a corporate live stream that would broadcast our family's success, the visionary CEO, his brilliant architect wife, their perfect daughter. the performance that would cement his reputation and launch the Malibu project into the stratosphere. He had no idea that I'd already drained 60% of the revenue base, that his CFO had defected, that his mistress was about to discover she'd been framed for federal crimes, that a rival he'd destroyed 15 years ago was ready to testify to systematic fraud, that his own father held the voting shares to execute him, waiting only for my signal. I allowed myself the smallest, coldest smile. "Problem?" Leonie asked, seeing my expression. "No," I said, setting the phone down and signing the final client transfer form. "Just my husband asking me to rehearse for a live stream that will broadcast our family's success to the world. Will you go?" "Of course." I closed the contract folder, the transferred clients now legally mine. The rehearsal will be perfect practice for my execution. But first, I needed to endure one more performance as the devoted wife. The performance began on November 22nd, and by the end of it, I'd stopped being Desmond's wife and become his daughter's only protection. Under the white-hot studio lights, my 8-year-old daughter stood frozen in pink ballet shoes, 2 sizes too small, tears pooling in her eyes, while Desmond barked at the production crew. "She needs to look happier. This is a family values spot, not a funeral." The broadcast studio in Midtown smelled like electrical equipment and expensive cologne, all chrome and glass, and the kind of cutting-edge technology that could broadcast to millions simultaneously. This was the rehearsal for the year-end Malibu livestream, the corporate celebration that would cement Desmond's reputation as visionary CEO and devoted family man. The opening segment required exactly 90 seconds of perfect family tableau, father, mother, daughter, standing together in front of architectural renderings of the resort, radiating success and stability. Ivy had been standing under those lights for 45 minutes. She'd come straight from school, still wearing her uniform, exhausted from a full day of classes and a math test she'd been anxious about all week. Desmond had changed her into the pink ballet dress he'd selected, the same costume from her October recital, the one he'd missed while approving fraudulent wire transfers on the sidewalk outside. The shoes were too small. I'd mentioned it twice. He'd ignored me both times. "Straighten your back, Ivy," Desmond said, his voice carrying that corporate precision he used on underperforming employees. The camera reads slouching as weakness. Ivy straightened her small shoulders, pulling back despite the obvious pain radiating from her compressed feet. A tear slipped down her cheek, catching the studio lights. "Don't cry," Desmond snapped. "We're broadcasting family values, not melodrama." "Daddy, my feet hurt," Ivy said quietly, her voice so small it barely carried across the studio. "They're fine. You wore these shoes for 2 hours at the recital." He'd been outside during that recital, on his phone, with his mistress, while his daughter had searched the audience for his face and found his seat empty. I stood in the shadows behind the cameras, watching my husband treat our daughter like a malfunctioning prop in his carefully orchestrated performance, and something fundamental shifted in my chest. I had watched Desmond commit many sins over the past 6 weeks, but watching him treat our daughter like stage furniture was the moment I stopped feeling anything for him except the cold arithmetic of justice. "Can we take 5?" I called out, stepping into the light. Desmond turned, irritation flashing across his face. "We're on a tight schedule, Saskia. She's 8 years old and her feet are bleeding," I said calmly, crossing to Ivy and kneeling beside her. Her ballet shoes had rubbed raw spots on both heels. "We're taking 5. I lifted Ivy off the mark, carried her to a chair offset, and removed the 2 small shoes with gentle hands. Behind us, Desmond was arguing with the production coordinator about optimal lighting angles, having already forgotten his daughter existed the moment she'd stepped out of frame. Ivy buried her face in my shoulder, trying not to cry. "It's okay, sweetheart," I whispered into her hair. "Mommy's got you." And I made an irrevocable decision in that moment, with my daughter's tears soaking through my blouse, and her father treating her like expendable set decoration. Ivy would not be in this building on December 31st. She would not stand on that stage while I dismantled her father's empire in front of streaming cameras. She would be safe, far away, protected from the blast radius, no matter what it cost me. My daughter would never be used as furniture in his theater again. 2 days later, on November 24th, I sat in Colleen Whitaker's cramped back office at the ballet studio, surrounded by racks of tutus and the faint smell of rosin and sweat. Colleen had called me that morning, her voice careful on the phone. You asked about security footage from October. I found something you need to see. She slid a USB drive across her cluttered desk, her expression troubled. The security camera catches everything. I didn't realize until you asked, but the angle captures not just the stage, it catches the street-facing window in the background. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened the file. Raw, unedited security footage from October 10th, timestamped 6:30 p.m. to 8:15 p.m. The frame showed the stage in sharp focus Ivy and her fellow dancers performing their carefully rehearsed routines. But in the background, through the large window that faced the street, the camera had captured something else. Desmond, pacing on the sidewalk outside the studio, phone pressed to his ear, his body language animated and intense. The timestamp read 6:47 p.m., exactly when Ivy had taken her final bow and searched the VIP section for her father's face. But the truly devastating detail came at 6:48 p.m. Through the window visible in the security footage's background, Desmond was clearly on his phone, gesturing emphatically. And according to Boyd Fleming's server logs, at precisely 6:48 p.m. on October 10th, Desmond had remotely approved a $50,000 wire transfer from Ivy's trust fund to one of the offshore shell companies. That's him in the background, I said quietly, outside, while she was on stage. I'm so sorry, Colleen said, genuine sympathy in her voice. I didn't know if you'd want to see this. The timestamp, I said, my mind already cataloging the evidence. It's embedded in the file metadata. It can't be altered. Everything's timestamped automatically, Colleen confirmed. The system logs can't be changed without corrupting the entire file. What kind of father misses his daughter's recital to approve a fraudulent wire transfer while consoling his mistress, the kind who'd already positioned that daughter as a shell corporation for money laundering? The kind who'd spent years weaponizing every relationship as leverage in his endless performance of success? I copied the file to my encrypted drive, then returned the original USB to Colleen. Thank you, I said simply. Will this help? She asked. I thought about December 31st. About stadium screens broadcasting evidence to thousands of guests and streaming viewers. About Desmond's face when he realized his daughter's ballet recital had captured 3 crimes in a single, unalterable timestamp: abandonment, embezzlement, and infidelity, all visible in one frame. Yes, I said, this will help. I slipped the USB drive into my coat pocket and felt its weight like a small, dense star, a single piece of evidence that proved abandonment, embezzlement, and infidelity in one unalterable timestamp. Colleen had no idea she'd just handed me the weapon that would play on stadium screens in front of the world on December 31st. But first, I had to spring the trap that would make Desmond sign his own execution order. The trap was elegant in its simplicity: give Desmond everything he wanted and watch him destroy himself with it. Thane Dalton slid a 43-page document across his desk on Thanksgiving Eve and said 7 words that made my pulse slow to something cold and surgical. This amendment will make him hang himself. His office at the Core Club smelled like leather-bound law books and the kind of expensive coffee that came from beans you couldn't pronounce. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan was preparing for Thanksgiving office buildings, emptying early traffic, thickening on the streets below the city. Settling into the rhythm of family dinners and careful performances of gratitude, I picked up the document. Executive Amendment to Marital Property Agreement. Malibu Cliff Resort Development Rights. The cover page was printed on heavy stock, professional and official, the kind of document that looked like reconciliation dressed in legal language. Walk me through it, I said. Thane opened his copy to page 3. The first 36 pages are exactly what his ego needs: total operational control over the Malibu project, decision-making authority over all development decisions, public designation as sole visionary and executive architect. His attorneys will read this section and tell him it's extremely favorable. Because it is, I said, on the surface. Exactly. You're positioning yourself as the reconciling wife who acknowledges his superior business acumen and grants him the control he's always deserved. It reads like capitulation. Thane turned to page 37. The font size dropped slightly, still legal, still readable, but just small enough that someone skimming would miss the significance. Appendix C: Compliance and Reversion Provisions. Page 37, Appendix C. Thane said, his finger tracing the clause that would detonate Desmond's empire. Any fraud detected within 90 days triggers automatic reversion, not litigation, not arbitration. Automatic and immediate transfer of all development rights, intellectual property ownership, and client contracts to your independent studio. I read the language carefully. The clause was airtight. If any material fraud, irregular foundation transfers, or unauthorized asset movements were detected within 90 days of signing everything, the entire Malibu project, every client relationship, every architectural blueprint, every procurement contract, would revert to Saskia Townsend Design Studio without further legal process required. His attorneys will read the control provisions and tell him it's favorable, I said quietly, already seeing how it would play out. Before I reveal the exact mechanism that would trigger this clause, are you still with me? Comment: A, if you think he'll sign it, or B, if you think his lawyers will catch the trap, and add Y in one sentence. A quick note. What follows includes some legal details adapted for narrative clarity. The strategy is what matters. They'll focus on pages 1 through 36, Thane continued, because those pages stroke his ego and appear to give him everything. The compliance provision in Appendix C will look like standard boilerplate. Every major contract has fraud protections. They won't realize it's a self-executing time bomb. Thane had built me a legal guillotine disguised as a marriage counseling agreement, and Desmond would put his own neck on the block. The beauty, Thane said, leaning back in his chair, is that you already have the evidence. The trust fund transfers, the server logs, the forged environmental reports, the offshore shell companies. Any one of those constitutes material fraud. The moment you present that evidence to anyone, a board member, an investor, a federal regulator, the 90-day clause activates and everything transfers to you automatically. No lawsuit, I said. No lawsuit, no discovery phase, no he said, she said divorce court drama. The amendment itself is the execution mechanism. He signs, it commits fraud within the monitoring period, and the contract executes itself. I thought about the server logs, showing the October 10th deletion at 1:17 a.m. The ballet studio footage with its unalterable timestamp. Clayton Mercer's ledgers documenting every fraudulent wire transfer. Carlton Rhodes's environmental forgery evidence spanning 15 years. Boyd Fleming's backup drives. Vivian's messages proving she'd been framed. I had enough evidence to trigger the clause 10 times over. He'll sign it because his narcissism won't let him believe I can outsmart him, I said, and it wasn't a question. Exactly. Thane's expression was clinical professional. In his mind, you're the compliant wife finally admitting he's the superior strategist. He'll see this as your surrender dressed in legal paperwork. His attorneys will confirm it's favorable, he'll congratulate himself on winning, and he'll sign without reading past the parts that feed his ego. What kind of man signs a 43-page legal document without reading past the parts that stroke his ego? The kind who'd spent 8 years treating his wife like set decoration while stealing her intellectual property. The kind who believed women existed to support his vision, not construct their own. The kind who was about to discover that the woman he'd underestimated had engineered his systematic destruction with the same methodical precision she'd once used to design his empire. When do you present it? Thane asked. The day after Thanksgiving, I said. After dinner with his family, after he's performed gratitude and family values for his parents. I'll frame it as my Thanksgiving gift to our marriage, a fresh start, a gesture of faith, proof that I'm committed to making this work. And when he signs, the 90-day clock starts. I looked at the calendar on Thane's desk. November 26th. If Desmond signed on November 27th, the monitoring period would end on February 25th. But I didn't need 90 days. I needed until December 31st, the night of the live stream, the night Walter would execute the proxy vote, the night I would present evidence to Malcolm Kingsley and watch the entire empire collapse in real time. 34 days, more than enough time to prove systematic fraud and trigger the automatic reversion. The moment you present evidence of fraud to any third-party board member, investor, regulator, the clause activates. Thane confirmed. Everything transfers to you instantly. No appeals, no injunctions. The contract is self-executing. I signed the amendment with my full legal name, Saskia L. Townsend, not Prescott, Never Prescott. And watch Thanes seal it in a leather portfolio embossed with his firm's insignia. Tomorrow is Thanksgiving dinner with the Prescott family, I said, standing and accepting the portfolio. The day after, I'll hand Desmond this document and watch him sign away his empire while thinking he's won. Thane stood, offering his hand. Good luck. I don't need luck, I said, shaking his hand with the same firm grip I'd used in 1,000 client meetings. I need him to be exactly who he's always been, a narcissist who can't imagine his wife is smarter than he is. I left Thane's office with the amendment secure in my briefcase, the legal weapon that would execute Desmond's empire with his own signature. But first, I had to survive dinner with the people who were about to lose everything. Thanksgiving dinner at the Prescott estate was a performance of gratitude masking calculated warfare, and Eleanor Prescott had prepared her final offensive. 3 days after Thanksgiving, Eleanor Prescott appeared at my office without warning. She closed the door behind her with the quiet precision of someone who had spent 50 years getting exactly what she wanted without raising her voice. No silver, no chandeliers, no ancestral portraits. Here, just two women in a room and an $8 million check she placed on my desk, like a declaration of war. $8 million, Eleanor said. Full trust fund for Ivy's split custody, ongoing support payments. You sign the NDA, you disappear quietly, and this family stays intact. Everyone wins. I looked at the check without touching it. $8 million to disappear. To let Desmond keep the empire he'd built on my stolen work. To raise my daughter knowing I'd been bought off like a problem to be solved with money. Everyone wins, I repeated, except the truth. Eleanor's expression didn't waver. The truth is a luxury we can't afford with the Malibu launch 2 weeks away. Be practical, Saskia. Take the money, protect your daughter from scandal, move on with your life. I stood, folded the check in half without looking at the amount again, and handed it back across the desk. Tell Desmond I said no. Eleanor took the check. Her fingers didn't tremble, but her eyes for one unguarded second held something that looked almost like respect. You're making a mistake, she said. I've made exactly one mistake in the last 8 years, I replied. I won't make another. She left without another word. The door clicked shut behind her. I sat back down at my desk and opened the Malibu_evidence folder. The machine was eating itself. On December 1st at 4:17 p.m., I received an encrypted intelligence report from a contact I'd cultivated months ago, someone close enough to Vivian to observe, but distant enough to remain objective. The message was brief. She knows. Meeting her sister now. Soho Cafe corner table. You need to see this. I didn't go personally. Too risky. But my contact sent real-time updates with photographic evidence. Vivienne Ballard sat across from her sister Lorraine in a Soho cafe that smelled like overpriced espresso and crushed dreams. Lorraine had brought printed copies of the unredacted corporate whistleblower complaint, the scapegoat protocol I'd leaked anonymously weeks earlier, through carefully constructed breadcrumbs designed to lead exactly here. The photos showed Vivienne's face going progressively whiter as she read. Page after page documenting her own destruction, her credentials routing millions in fraudulent transfers, her login timestamps on deleted files, her digital fingerprints all over crimes she'd committed under Desmond's direction, without realizing she was being positioned as the designated defendant. "You're not his partner," Lorraine said, her voice carrying through my contact's discreet audio recording. "You're his designated defendant. He's been building this case against you for months. If federal investigators come asking questions, every piece of evidence points directly to you while he walks away clean." "He wouldn't do this to me," Vivian said, her voice breaking. "He loves me. He promised—" "Read the metadata, Viv. This document was created in September, 3 weeks before you even knew his wife suspected the affair. He's been planning your destruction since before you realized you needed to worry." Vivian had spent months believing she was Desmond's chosen one when she'd actually been his pre-positioned human shield, and the shield had just realized it was made of paper. The next photo showed Vivian's phone screen as she typed a message to Desmond, her hands shaking so badly the text had obvious typos that she had to correct "marriage commitment contract by this weekend, or I go to the FBI." She sent it at 2:47 p.m. According to my contact's final update, Desmond called her within 90 seconds. The conversation lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. Vivian left the cafe, crying, Lorraine following with grim determination. I sat in my home office reading the intelligence report, watching pieces converge with the precision of a well-designed structure reaching completion. Vivian had discovered she was being framed for federal crimes. In panic and desperation, she'd threatened to expose Desmond to the FBI unless he legally committed to marriage, inadvertently applying exactly the kind of pressure that would make him reckless, desperate, willing to sign anything that appeared to give him control. Like, for instance, a 43-page executive amendment granting him operational authority over Malibu while secretly containing a 90-day self-destruct clause. I received the encrypted intelligence report at 4:17 p.m. Vivian Ballard had discovered the scapegoat protocol and was now threatening Desmond with federal exposure unless he married her. He was trapped between a panicking mistress who could destroy him and a wife who already had the evidence to execute him. The machine was eating itself, and I was about to hand him the key to his own guillotine disguised as a peace offering. I handed Desmond his destruction on December 10th, wrapped in legal language and bound in leather. But first I needed the final pieces of evidence that would make the trap inescapable. The flash drive weighed nothing in my palm, but Clayton Mercer's hand shook when he placed it there, his breath fogging in the underground parking garage at 6:47 a.m. on December 4th. Every wire transfer since September, Clayton said quietly, his voice echoing off concrete pillars in the empty garage. Every altered invoice, the shell companies, the routing numbers, the timestamps, all of it. The parking structure smelled like exhaust and fear. Clayton looked like he hadn't slept in days. His suit-wrinkled tie loosened the kind of disheveled appearance that came from watching your entire career collapse into criminal exposure. The next automated transfer is December 12th. He continued, pulling up a spreadsheet on his phone with trembling fingers. After that, the account closes. He's planned this for months, routing money through Ivy's trust fund in monthly cycles, then closing the offshore accounts before year-end audits. Perfectly timed to avoid detection. I looked at the data. Every transaction traced back to a master offshore account that automatically transferred to Ivy's trust fund on the 12th of each month. The pattern was meticulous, systematic, exactly the kind of financial architecture that required months of careful planning. The same precision that had made Desmond a successful architect had created a perfect forensic trail. He'd built his own destruction with the same methodical care he'd once used to build empires. "You never saw me," I said, pocketing the flash drive. "This conversation didn't happen." Clayton nodded, relief washing over his face. He'd chosen survival over loyalty, and I'd given him the only lifeline available, immunity, in exchange for evidence. 3 days later, I sat across from Boyd Fleming in a coffee shop on 3rd Street Promenade in Santa Monica. The ocean air drifted through open windows, carrying the scent of salt and espresso. Boyd slid a second encrypted drive across the table, his expression carrying the grim satisfaction of a man who'd waited weeks for this moment. October 10th, 1:17 a.m. Boyd set his voice low enough that surrounding conversations wouldn't pick up the details. He logged in with her credentials, deleted the original files, then uploaded his sanitized versions. The whole thing took 17 minutes. And the camera, mounted above the design archive terminal. High-resolution security feed. The metadata shows everything: file creation dates, IP addresses, keystroke logs. And the camera caught his face clearly. No question, it's him using Vivian's login to commit fraud. I thought about Vivian discovering the scapegoat protocol, her desperate text threatening federal exposure. She'd been framed so thoroughly that even security footage would show her credentials on every crime, except this one piece of evidence proved Desmond had been the one actually using those credentials while she slept. "How long until he realizes the footage exists?" I asked. Boyd's smile was bitter. "He ordered me to delete all security archives when he fired me. He thinks they're gone. He doesn't know I kept encrypted backups." The architect of his own destruction, building evidence against himself with the same precision he'd used to steal my work. By December 9th, I had everything. Financial ledgers from Clayton, security footage from Boyd, the original concept Bible from Leonie, Carlton's environmental fraud documentation, Vivian's panicked messages, Walter's conditional alliance, the ballet studio timestamp, and the 43-page amendment with its hidden 90-day kill clause. I was in my home office at 8:15 p.m. when Desmond appeared in the doorway, looking for Ivy's spring semester schedule. he said, casually stepping into the room without invitation. Thought you kept it in here. Top drawer, right side, where it's always been. I watched him open the drawer, his movements careful, methodical. He wasn't looking for Ivy's schedule. He was searching for evidence, anything that might indicate I knew about the fraud, the affair, the money laundering. His fingers hesitated over certain files. His breathing slightly elevated the weight of his presence, filling my workspace like an intrusion I'd been expecting. But there was nothing to find. Every piece of real evidence had been encrypted, copied, and moved to secure locations weeks ago. The documents in these drawers were exactly what they appeared to be: school schedules, architectural sketches for legitimate projects, household bills. I sat perfectly still watching him search while projecting absolute unconcern. The contrast between his barely controlled paranoia and my complete calm should have warned him that the balance of power had shifted. But narcissists don't read warning signs, they read confirmation of their own superiority. Found it, he said, holding up Ivy's schedule that had been exactly where I'd told him. Of course, I said, I'm very organized. He left without another word, his footsteps retreating down the hallway toward his own office. The moment I heard his door close, I pulled out my phone and texted Thane. Final amendment ready. Deliver tomorrow morning with 48-hour execution deadline. Everything depends on the signature. Thane's response arrived at 9:03 p.m. Amendment delivered to his office. 48-hour deadline begins 8 a.m. tomorrow. If he signs, the IP transfers. If he refuses, we proceed to court with everything. I stared at the message, listening to Desmond's footsteps in the hallway above. 2 days, 48 hours between surrender and annihilation. The amendment would arrive at his office tomorrow morning via courier professional official, accompanied by a cover letter I'd written in my own hand, positioning it as my gesture of reconciliation, my acknowledgement that he deserved operational control, my attempt to save our marriage by granting him the authority he'd always deserved. His attorneys would review it. They'd see pages 1 through 36 granting him everything. They'd skim Appendix C and see standard fraud protection language that appeared in every major contract. They'd advise him to sign. And Desmond, trapped between a mistress threatening FBI exposure and a wife offering apparent capitulation, desperate to secure control before everything collapsed, would put his signature on the document that would execute his empire the moment I presented evidence of the fraud he'd already committed. The question wasn't whether he'd sign, it was whether he'd realize what he was signing before it was too late. He didn't realize. He signed without reading past the parts that fed his ego, exactly as predicted. Desmond's signature hit the page at 2:14 p.m. on December 11th. Black ink flowing across the amendment line like blood from an opened vein. The executive boardroom at corporate headquarters smelled like leather and fresh coffee, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking Century City in the afternoon light. Thane Dalton sat across the mahogany table in his capacity as neutral legal witness, his expression professionally blank. I sat beside Desmond, playing the role I'd perfected over 8 years, the submissive wife, desperate to save her marriage, willing to surrender everything to prove her commitment. You understand what you're signing? Thane asked, his voice carrying the careful precision of an attorney establishing legal record. All executive control of the Malibu Cliff Resort development transfers to Mr. Prescott, contingent on the 90-day indemnity clause outlined in Appendix C. Desmond barely glanced at the appendix. His attorneys had reviewed the document that morning and advised him exactly as predicted. The control provisions were extremely favorable. The compliance language was standard boilerplate, and his wife was finally acknowledging his superior business acumen. Sign immediately before she changed her mind. She understands, Desmond said, his voice carrying that patronizing warmth he used when explaining simple concepts to people he considered intellectually inferior. Don't you, darling, this is what's best for our family, for Ivy. I met his eyes and delivered my line with perfect practiced submission. Yes, I understand perfectly. And I did. I understood that he was signing a self-executing legal guillotine. I understood that his own automated financial system would trigger the trap within hours. I understood that the empire he believed he was securing would transfer to me before he woke up tomorrow morning. But he didn't understand any of that. He saw a wife capitulating an amendment granting him everything, a victory sealed in legal language and witnessed by competent counsel. The signature took 3 seconds. Desmond Prescott, CEO. December 11th, 2025, 2:14 p.m. His handwriting was confident, flowing the signature of a man who believed himself untouchable. The moment of fall was already complete, but the head doesn't know it's severed yet. He would walk around for hours, maybe days, believing he'd won, unaware that the blade had already dropped, and his empire was bleeding out in legal language he'd signed without reading. Thane collected the executed documents with professional efficiency, providing Desmond with a certified copy and filing the original with timestamp verification. Everything legal, everything binding, everything designed to execute automatically the moment the 90-day indemnity clause was breached. Congratulations, Thane said neutrally. The amendment is now in full effect. Desmond shook his hand, then turned to me with something that looked almost like tenderness. Thank you for this, Saskia. I know it wasn't easy to admit I should have full operational control, but this is the right decision for everyone. I smiled with every muscle in my face except my eyes. I just want what's best for our family. We left the boardroom together, Desmond's arm around my shoulders, in a gesture of victorious possession. He spent the rest of the day in meetings, celebrating with investors, making calls to board members about the upcoming Malibu launch. He had no idea that less than 12 hours from now, the empire he was celebrating would cease to be his. I went home and waited. At 1:17 a.m. on December 12th, I sat in the kitchen of our Pacific Palisades penthouse, laptop open, monitoring the automated financial systems that Desmond had built months ago and forgotten to disable after signing the amendment. The automated transfer executed at exactly 12:03 a.m., just as Clayton's ledgers had predicted. $4.7 million left the Ivy Prescott Arts and Education Foundation and routed through 2 shell companies before landing in the Ballard Family Trust, registered in Grand Cayman, the offshore account Desmond had created to funnel money to Vivian's family as insurance against her cooperation. My phone vibrated with an encrypted message from Clayton. Transaction confirmed. $4.7 million left the foundation account at 12:03 a.m. Routed to Ballard Family Trust, Grand Cayman. Indemnity clause breached. I typed back, "How long before he realizes?" Clayton's response was immediate. The automated reversion logs timestamp everything. He signed at 2:14 p.m. yesterday, breached at 12:03 a.m. today, less than 10 hours. It's already over. I watched the clock tick toward dawn each second. A hammer blow driving the trap closed, the weight of 7 months of planning condensing into this single automated transaction. Everything I'd built, the evidence, the alliances, the legal mechanisms, all of it converging on this moment when Desmond's own financial system executed the clause that would destroy him. The laptop screen displayed the reversion protocol interface, waiting for my authorization to release. The system had automatically logged the breach, verified the timestamps, confirmed the materiality of the fraud, and prepared the transfer documentation. All development rights, intellectual property ownership, client contracts, and operational control of the Malibu Cliff Resort project had already transferred to Saskia Townsend Design Studio at 12:03:47 a.m. Legally, it was done. The amendment had executed itself exactly as designed. But I didn't click release. Not yet. I wanted Desmond to wake up this morning still believing he'd won. I wanted him to make calls, send emails, schedule meetings about the Malibu project he thought he controlled. I wanted him to taste victory before I showed him it was ashes. The screen glowed green. Reversion protocol active. Malibu. Cliff Resort development rights. Transferred to Saskia Marie Townsend. Effective 12:03:47 a.m. December 12th, 2025. I didn't click release. Not yet. Let him wake up tomorrow still believing he won. Let him taste the victory before I showed him the ashes in his mouth. He woke up on December 12th still believing he'd won. I let him have 2 more days of that illusion before I started dismantling the people who'd helped him build it. My assistant had accidentally, or perhaps not so accidentally, confirmed my late office departure to 3 people that afternoon. One of them, I suspected, had passed the information along. It didn't matter. I'd been half expecting this. Vivian Ballard's hand slammed against my car window at 6:47 p.m. on December 14th, her mascara running in black rivers down her face. I'd just left my office in Manhattan, the winter evening already dark, the parking garage nearly empty. Vivian stood in front of my car, blocking my path, her breath coming in short gasps that fogged in the cold air. She'd been waiting for me. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "just let him go. I love him. We never meant to hurt you. We deserve to be happy." I turned off the engine and stepped out of the car, the parking garage smelling like exhaust and desperation. Vivian looked destroyed, her eyes red, her professional polish completely gone, wearing the kind of devastation that comes from watching your entire world collapse. "Deserve," I repeated quietly, the word tasting like copper on my tongue. "You think you deserve happiness built on fraud and stolen work." "I didn't know about any of that," Vivian said desperately. "The designs, the files, I was just doing what he asked. I didn't know you'd created everything. He told me it was collaborative, that you'd agreed, and you believed him because it was easier than asking questions." Vivian's face crumpled. "I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I'll leave. I'll transfer to another firm. I'll sign whatever you want. Just, please, let him go. Let us have a chance." I looked at this 26-year-old woman who'd helped destroy my marriage without understanding she was also destroying herself, and I felt something colder than anger. I felt the clinical detachment of a surgeon removing diseased tissue. "You're weeping for a man who uploaded files under your credentials that will send you to federal prison," I said calmly. "Check your sister's phone. He's been setting you up since October." Vivian went completely still. "You're lying," she whispered. "Desmond wouldn't. He loves me. He promised." "Check your sister's phone." I enunciated each word with surgical precision. "Lorraine has the whistleblower complaint he drafted. Your name is on every crime. Your credentials routing every fraudulent transaction. He built you as the perfect scapegoat, and when federal investigators come asking questions, you'll be the one facing 20 years while he walks away clean." How many women had Desmond destroyed with promises before learning to destroy them with evidence instead? How many times had he refined this formula? Seduce, manipulate, position as fall guy, escape. Vivian pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scrolling frantically. I didn't wait to watch her world shatter. I got back in my car and drove away, leaving her standing in that parking garage with the truth finally catching up. 2 days later, I sat in the living room of the Prescott estate in the Hamptons watching Eleanor make her final desperate play. The room smelled like wood polish and old money, afternoon light streaming through windows that overlooked grounds where generations of Prescotts had gathered to celebrate empire. Eleanor sat across from me in Chanel pearls and tailored cashmere, every inch the corporate matriarch who'd spent 50 years getting exactly what she wanted. $8 million, Eleanor said, sliding a document across the coffee table. "Full trust fund for Ivy split custody, ongoing support payments. You sign the NDA, you disappear quietly, and this family stays intact. Everyone wins." I looked at the settlement offer without touching it. $8 million to disappear. To let Desmond keep the empire he'd built on my stolen work. To raise my daughter knowing I'd been bought off like a problem to be solved with money. "Everyone wins," I repeated, "except the truth." "The truth," Eleanor said with barely concealed contempt, "is a luxury we can't afford with the Malibu launch 2 weeks away. Be practical, Saskia. Take the money. Protect your daughter from scandal. Move on with your life." "Enough." The voice came from the doorway, rough as gravel and absolute as judgment. Walter Prescott stood there, 80 years old and done with pretense. He crossed the room in 3 strides and smashed his whiskey glass on the marble floor with enough force that shards skittered across the room. "We do not use my granddaughter as currency to hide a criminal enterprise." Walter said, his voice carrying the kind of fury that comes from watching your legacy get corrupted. "This is exactly what destroyed my father's legacy, buying silence, covering fraud, treating family reputation as more valuable than integrity." Eleanor stood. "Father, you don't understand the stakes." "I understand perfectly." Walter turned to me, his pale eyes carrying the cold assessment of a man who'd built empires and wasn't afraid to demolish them. "Show me definitive proof on the 31st. Not allegations, not theories. Proof. If you have it, I will execute the expulsion myself." I felt the weight of legacy versus loyalty watching this 80-year-old man's hand shake as he confronted his son's crimes. The moment a father chooses justice over blood is the moment empires either survive or collapse. Walter had made his choice. I have it, I said quietly. Financial ledgers, security footage, forensic documentation, witness testimony, everything timestamped, verified, and unassailable. Then bring it, Walter said. December 31st, the year-end board meeting. Present your evidence to the full board, and I will cast the proxy vote that removes my son from every position of authority in this company. Eleanor's face went white. You can't be serious. I'm completely serious. Walter's voice was steel. And Eleanor, you will not interfere. You will not make calls. You will not leverage relationships. You will sit in that boardroom and watch integrity return to this company, or you will find yourself removed from the board as well. The $8 million settlement offer sat on the coffee table, suddenly meaningless. Walter walked me to the door, his hand steady on my shoulder. December 31st. Bring everything. If my son has committed fraud using my company's resources, I will remove him myself. His eyes were steel. And Eleanor will not interfere. Behind us, Eleanor stood frozen, her $8 million bribe dissolving like ash. The patriarch had chosen sides, and it wasn't his son's. With Walter's commitment secured, I had the patriarch's execution authority. Now I needed the kingmaker's capital and the evidence to make it stick. Can the Malibu brand survive if I remove the CEO? Malcolm Kingsley's question hung in the December air, like frost, his $60 million investment waiting on my answer. We sat in the golf pavilion at Westchester Country Club on December 18th. Windows overlooking frost-covered greens, the smell of cedar and expensive coffee filling the small heated space. Malcolm Kingsley was 59, lead investor, and Prescott Holdings board member, with a stake large enough to swing votes, and he sat across from me in tailored cashmere with the measured precision of a man who deployed capital like surgical instruments. The concept Bible, I said, sliding the document across the table. Every design element, every brand position, every sustainability metric. I wrote this 18 months ago. Desmond presented it as his own. Malcolm opened to this title page, his eyes scanning the finalization date 3 months before Prescott Development Group legally existed. The pre-incorporation IP clause meant everything in this binder, every innovation, every client relationship, every architectural vision legally belonged to me. The reversion clause triggered on December 12th, I continued. The IP rights transferred back to me when he breached the indemnity provision. Legally, I own Malibu now. Malcolm turned pages slowly, his expression giving nothing away. And the clients? The top 20 legacy clients, 60% of projected revenue, have already transferred to my independent studio. Legally executed, fully documented. They're tied to the architect, not the CEO. So you're telling me, Malcolm said carefully, that the Malibu project I've invested $60 million into is now controlled by you, not Desmond? Correct. And on December 31st, the board will vote on whether to remove him as CEO. Correct. Malcolm leaned back, his fingers steepled in thought. The assembly of allies felt like constructing a building, each piece positioned precisely, load-bearing structures tested foundation, poured in concrete before the final reveal. Walter provided the family authority. Malcolm controlled the capital. Together, they could execute a removal that would be swift, legal, and absolute. Can the Malibu brand survive if I remove the CEO? Malcolm asked again, and this time I understood it wasn't a question, it was an audition. Because that's what the board vote on the 31st will determine, whether we back the architect or the thief. The brand survives, I said with absolute certainty. The project is intact, the clients are secured, the vision is documented. The only thing that changes is who gets credit for execution and who faces federal prosecution for fraud. Malcolm's smile was thin but genuine. Then I'll back the architect. But I need more than IP clauses and marital betrayal. I need evidence that protects my investment and my reputation. Corporate fraud, pattern behavior. The kind of documentation that makes removing a CEO look like fiduciary responsibility instead of family drama. You'll have it, I said. December 31st, complete forensic documentation. 3 days later, in Thane's conference room in Manhattan, I watched Carlton Rhodes sign the final piece of evidence that would transform my case from revenge into prosecution. The conference room smelled like leather and fresh ink, afternoon light streaming through windows overlooking the city. Carlton sat at the mahogany table, the notarized affidavit in front of him, his hands steady as he signed each page with deliberate precision. 7 years of forged permits, stolen designs, falsified environmental reports. Carlton said, his voice carrying the controlled fury of a man who'd waited years for this moment. He destroyed my Santa Barbara project using my own signature. This affidavit makes it a criminal pattern. I watched each stroke of the pen another nail in Desmond's coffin, years of fraud condensed into legal testimony that could not be disputed or dismissed. Carlton had brought documentation that proved Desmond's fraud wasn't opportunistic, it was systematic. A pattern spanning years, multiple victims, deliberate criminal enterprise. This is no longer a marital dispute, Thane said, reviewing the notarized pages. This is documented racketeering with multiple victims across state lines. The affidavit is notarized and binding. Carlton signed the final page and pushed the document across the table. Good, I want to watch. You'll have a front row seat, I said. A knock on the conference room door interrupted us. Thane's assistant showed in Darlene Hutchins, financial reporter for Architectural Digest's corporate desk, carrying a professional-grade camera and a press credential that would give her access to the December 31st board meeting. Darlene was efficient, professional, the kind of journalist who understood that corporate executions made better stories than press releases. She set her equipment on the table and pulled out a contract. Front row camera slot confirmed for December 31st, Darlene said. Corporate live stream, full audio. If he falls, the entire market watches it happen in real time. And if he doesn't fall, Thane asked. Then I delete the footage and write a boring piece about year-end corporate governance, Darlene said with a slight smile. But based on what you've described, I should probably clear my January calendar for follow-up interviews. She signed the access agreement, providing her press credentials and live stream platform details. The December 31st board meeting would be broadcast to industry insiders, investors, and anyone following Prescott Development's Malibu launch. Desmond's destruction wouldn't happen in private, it would happen in front of cameras with his own father casting the vote that removed him. Thane slid the sealed affidavit into the evidence binder, pages thick with forensic proof. December 31st. Malcolm backs the vote, Carlton testifies to the pattern, Walter executes the removal, and Darlene broadcasts it live. The perimeter is sealed. I looked at the calendar on Thane's desk, December 21st. 10 days until Desmond walked into a boardroom rigged like a legal minefield, his own father holding the detonator. 10 days collapsed into 4, and there was one final piece that mattered more than all the evidence combined, getting Ivy somewhere safe before I detonated her father's empire. Ivy's small hand fit perfectly in mine. As we walked up the gravel path to my mother's country home on December 27th, 4 days before I would destroy her father. The house sat on 3 acres in upstate New York, far enough from Manhattan that the fallout wouldn't reach her, but close enough that I could return after the execution. Smoke rose from the chimney windows, glowing warm against the December twilight. My mother stood in the doorway, understanding everything I couldn't say on the phone, ready to protect her granddaughter from the blast radius I was about to create. Ivy skipped ahead in her purple winter coat, the gravel crunching under her small boots, still innocent enough to believe her parents' marriage might survive, still young enough to trust that Mommy's promises meant forever. "Why do you have to go back to the city for the project, Mama?" Ivy asked, turning to face me with those dark eyes that looked so much like mine. "Can't you stay for dinner?" The lie tasted like ash, but I delivered it with perfect maternal warmth. "I have to finish a very important presentation for work, but I'll be back soon and Grandma has hot chocolate waiting. With marshmallows." "With marshmallows," my mother confirmed from the doorway, her eyes meeting mine with understanding that cut straight through. Ivy seemed satisfied with that answer, but then she asked the question that made my chest constrict. "Is Daddy going to come see my winter recital next week? I'm the snowflake queen in the second act." I knelt in the gravel beside her, eye level with my 8-year-old daughter, who still believed her father cared about dance recitals and promises. Protecting Ivy from the blast zone meant she couldn't know what I was about to do. She couldn't know that in 4 days I would systematically destroy her father's empire in front of cameras and investors. She couldn't know that the daddy she loved had built his success on fraud, theft, and the weaponization of everyone he claimed to love. She especially couldn't know that her mother had become the architect of his destruction. "Mommy will always be right there, sweetheart." I said, kissing her forehead with the kind of promise I intended to keep, even if everything else fell apart. Always, no matter what happens. Ivy wrapped her arms around my neck, the weight of 8-year-old trust nearly breaking me. I held her for a long moment, breathing in the scent of her shampoo and winter air, feeling the physical sensation of unconditional love mixed with the knowledge that protecting this child meant becoming the villain in her story, at least for now. How do you tell your daughter that justice and love sometimes demand the same sacrifice? That protecting her future means destroying her present? That the father she adores has been using her name to launder money and her trust as leverage in his criminal enterprise? You don't. You lie. You kiss her forehead. You leave her somewhere safe. And you do what needs to be done to ensure she never becomes currency in someone else's fraud. Go inside with Grandma, I said gently. I'll call you tomorrow. Ivy hugged me once more, then ran up the steps into the warm house where my mother wrapped her in blankets and promises of hot chocolate. I stood in the gravel driveway watching the door close, watching the windows glow with the kind of safety I was about to sacrifice to give her a future free from her father's corruption. My mother appeared on the porch alone, her silhouette backlit by the warm interior. We didn't speak. She just nodded once in acknowledgement that she would protect Ivy from whatever fallout came, that she understood why I had to do this, that she'd raised a daughter who wouldn't tolerate being stolen from or used. I got in my car and drove back toward Manhattan, the winter darkness settling over upstate highways. 40 minutes into the drive, when I was certain I was alone and clear-headed, I pulled over at a rest stop and opened the encrypted app on my phone. The technical checklist appeared on screen, each line representing a different piece of evidence, each piece corresponding to one of 7 presentation slots I'd programmed for the December 31st livestream. Slot 1. Financial Ledgers. Clayton Mercer's comprehensive documentation of fraudulent transfers. Slot 2. Security footage. Boyd Fleming's October 10th video showing Desmond deleting files with Vivian's credentials at 1:17 a.m. Slot 3. Server logs. Complete timestamp records proving systematic fraud. Slot 4. Affidavits. Carlton Rhodes's notarized testimony documenting 7-year criminal pattern. Slot 5. Reversion documents. Legal proof of IP ownership transfer triggered by indemnity breach. Slot 6. Ballet studio footage. Unalterable timestamp showing Desmond's absence during Ivy's recital while approving fraudulent transfer. Slot 7. Whistleblower complaint. The scapegoat protocol showing premeditated framing of both mistress and wife. I reviewed each file one final time, verifying integrity, confirming encryption, ensuring the presentation would execute flawlessly when Darlene Hutchins broadcast it to the world. Every piece of evidence was locked, loaded, and ready. I typed the confirmation code LED_slots_1_through_7_ready. The system responded immediately. Live stream coordinates locked. Broadcast window. December 31st, 2025, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Presenter authorization. Saskia Marie Townsend. Witness count 47. Board members plus streaming audience. Evidence chain verified. The phone screen glowed in the winter darkness. LED_slots_1_through_7_ready. Live stream coordinates locked. Broadcast window. December 31st, 2025, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I looked back toward the direction of the country house where Ivy was safe, warm, loved outside the blast radius. 4 days. Then Desmond would walk into that boardroom and discover that the architect of his destruction had been sleeping beside him all along. December 29th, 2 days before execution. I stood in the marble foyer of Walter Prescott's Beacon Hill mansion at 6:30 in the morning, a leather portfolio containing 87 pages of evidence in my hands. The patriarch had agreed to see me only after I'd sent a single text message at midnight. I know why Margaret really died. Meet me before Desmond wakes. The butler, a man whose name I'd never learned in 7 years of family dinners, led me through halls lined with portraits of Prescott men dating back to 1887. Every face wore the same expression of entitled certainty. Tomorrow, that lineage would fracture. Mrs. Prescott. Walter emerged from his study in a burgundy smoking jacket, white hair immaculate despite the hour. At 74, he still commanded rooms with the same force that had built Prescott Capital from a single Boston office into a transatlantic empire. This concerns my daughter. Your daughter discovered what Desmond was doing. I handed him the portfolio. She tried to stop him. That's why she drove off that bridge. I watched the blood drain from his face as he opened the folder. Eleanor's handwritten notes dated 3 weeks before her death. Bank statements highlighting the same irregularities she'd flagged. Email drafts never sent addressed to her father beginning Daddy. I need to tell you something about Desmond that will break your heart. She knew. Walter's hands trembled on the pages. My Eleanor knew, and she was coming to me. He found out she'd scheduled a meeting with you, December 15th, 2019. She died December 12th. You're saying my son-in-law murdered my daughter. I'm saying the brake line investigation was closed too quickly. I'm saying the state trooper who filed the report retired 6 months later and bought a house in Naples, Florida cash. I'm saying Desmond's assistant scheduled a maintenance appointment for Eleanor's Mercedes 2 days before the crash, but there's no service record at the dealership. Walter sank into a leather chair that had probably cost more than most people's cars. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked old. The board meeting is December 31st, I continued quietly. Desmond thinks he has the votes to oust you and install himself as chairman. He thinks his 18% block plus Vivian Ballard's 12% gives him control. And what do you want from me? I want you to give me proxy authority over your 18%. Unconditional voting control. And I want you to sit in that boardroom on December 31st and watch him realize what he's lost. The grandfather clock in the corner marked 7 a.m. with Westminster chimes. Somewhere across the city, Desmond was waking up in our Beacon Hill townhouse, believing I was visiting my mother in upstate New York, believing everything was proceeding according to his plan. You've orchestrated this entire thing. Walter's voice held something between horror and admiration. How long? Since October 10th, the day I found the photographs. He studied me with the same analytical intensity he'd once used to evaluate billion-dollar acquisitions. You're very much like Eleanor. She had the same quality, this precision in her fury. Then honor her memory, sign the proxy. Walter pulled a fountain pen from his jacket pocket, the same Mont Blanc he'd used to sign the papers that had made Desmond his successor. His signature flowed across the proxy authorization form with the practiced elegance of 7 decades in power. Make him suffer, he said simply. The second meeting happened at noon in a parking garage in South Boston, far from any security cameras that might record Vivian Ballard's defection. She arrived in a black sedan with tinted windows, wearing oversized sunglasses despite the overcast December sky. When she removed them, I saw the circles under her eyes, weeks of sleepless nights, showing through expensive concealer. You have 20 minutes before I need to be at a lunch meeting, she said. Make it count. I handed her a tablet displaying a single email. From Desmond to Vivian, dated March 2024. Execute the Luxembourg transfer tonight. If the SEC asks questions, you know nothing. I'll handle the documentation trail. Where did you get that? Her voice went sharp. I have 417 more just like it, all showing you following Desmond's explicit instructions. All showing him commanding every fraudulent action while positioning you as the fall guy if anything went wrong. Vivian's perfectly manicured nails dug into her palms. That bastard. He promised me partnership. He said we were in this together. He was using you. The same way he used Eleanor. The same way he's used everyone who ever trusted him. What do you want? I want the encrypted drive you keep in your office safe. The one with the unredacted communications. I want you to testify on camera that Desmond Prescott commanded all fraudulent activities, and I want you in that boardroom on December 31st voting with me instead of with him. In exchange for what? In exchange for my full support as a cooperating witness on your behalf. I bring your evidence and your testimony to federal prosecutors alongside mine. You become the person who came forward voluntarily, not the designated defendant. Prosecutors respond very differently to those two narratives, but I can't promise you an outcome. I can only promise you the best possible position. Vivian was silent for 37 seconds. I counted. I'll need the testimony agreement in writing, she finally said, and I want confirmation from the SEC that I'm cooperating, not confessing. My attorney will have the paperwork to you by 6 p.m. tonight. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small encrypted drive, the kind that required both a password and a fingerprint to access. Password is Eleanor-2019. He thought he was being sentimental. Really, he was just documenting his guilt. I took the drive, feeling its weight less than an ounce of metal and plastic, containing enough evidence to destroy a man's entire existence. He called me this morning, Vivian said as she turned to leave. Told me to wear something powerful to the board meeting. Said we were about to make history. She smiled, then cold and precise as a scalpel. He has no idea, does he? None at all. I drove back to the hotel where I'd been staying since dropping Ivy at my mother's house. The encrypted drive sat in my coat pocket. Walter's signed proxy sat in my briefcase. Tomorrow I would review the video testimony. Tomorrow I would confirm every piece was in position. But tonight I stood at the window watching Boston's lights reflect off the harbor and thought about Eleanor Prescott, who'd tried to stop her husband and died for it. December 31st was 36 hours away. 36 hours became 31, then 24, then 12. By 11:40 on the night of December 30th, I was standing in a temperature-controlled bank mainframe room in Manhattan, watching Clayton Mercer's fingers move across a keyboard with surgical precision. Each keystroke severed another financial artery, keeping Desmond's empire alive. Federal compliance protocol activated, Clayton said quietly, his face illuminated by 3 monitors displaying cascading lines of code. Every account linked to the breach documentation is now frozen pending investigation. He can't move a dollar. The room hummed with the white noise of cooling systems and redundant servers. 23 floors below us, New York City prepared for New Year's Eve celebrations. Up here, we were executing a different kind of countdown. How long before he realizes, I asked. He'll try to access funds in the morning, transfer authorization for the Malibu development payroll. Probably he's got 47 contractors expecting payment on January 2nd. Clayton's tone was clinical, a CFO reporting quarterly figures. By then, you'll already be in the boardroom with every card in your hand. I watched the screens as account after account shifted status from active to frozen. The Malibu Development Fund, $4.7 million locked. The Luxembourg operating account, $8.3 million inaccessible. The Cayman Bridge financing, $12.1 million completely paralyzed. $25 million frozen in 90 seconds. The beauty of federal anti-money laundering protocols, Clayton continued, pulling up another screen, is that they trigger automatically when certain documentation flags appear in the system. I didn't freeze these accounts. The compliance algorithm did based on the evidence logs you provided. And if anyone asks, the bank followed standard regulatory procedure. We had documentation suggesting potential violations. We're legally obligated to freeze assets pending investigation. He glanced at me. It's not personal, it's compliance. Except it was deeply methodically personal. Every frozen account had been chosen with the precision I'd once used to design load-bearing structures. Cut the weight-bearing columns and the entire architecture collapses. Last one, Clayton murmured. His fingers flew across the keyboard one final time. Personal checking account. The one he uses for his Amex payments, his club memberships, his mistress's apartment rent, I finished. Clayton hit enter. On the screen, Desmond Prescott's personal account, the one containing $847,000, shifted to frozen. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I pulled it out already knowing who it would be. Tomorrow night you stand right by my side, darling. Wear something that photographs well. The board always releases a statement photo after the chairman vote. I stared at the text message, at the casual endearment from a man who had no idea his wife had just severed every financial artery in his body. Tomorrow night, stand by his side, wear something that photographs well. I typed back, already picked out the perfect outfit. White, you'll love it. Send. You're smiling, Clayton observed. Am I? I pocketed the phone. I suppose I am. We left the mainframe room at 11:57. By midnight, I was back at my hotel. By 3 a.m., I'd reviewed Vivian's video testimony one final time, confirming every detail matched the documentation. By 6 a.m., I'd slept exactly 90 minutes, the same amount of sleep I'd averaged since October 10th. By 3 p.m. on December 31st, I was standing in the dressing room of our Pacific Palisades penthouse, staring at the white suit I'd bought 2 years ago. Desmond had been with me when I'd tried it on at the Rodeo Drive boutique. The sales associate had said it was powerful, architectural, commanding. Desmond had laughed, actually laughed, and told me it was too aggressive for a corporate wife. "You're the creative one, darling," he'd said, steering me toward a soft dove-gray dress instead. "Leave the power suits to the people who need them." I'd bought the white suit anyway, hung it in the back of my closet behind the dove-gray dresses and the soft cashmere cardigans, and all the other costumes I'd worn to play the demure architect's wife, who smiled at his colleagues and never asked questions. Now I pulled the suit from its garment bag. The fabric was sharp, crisp, unforgiving. Italian wool with a subtle texture that caught the light. The jacket had strong shoulders and nipped waist buttons like small weapons. The pants fell in a precise line that I'd once calculated using the golden ratio. I put it on slowly, feeling the transformation with each piece. The pants perfectly tailored, the silk blouse ice white against my skin, the jacket settling onto my shoulders like armor. Then I looked down at my left hand. The diamond wedding band had lived there for 15 years. 18-karat gold princess-cut diamond, purchased by Desmond's mother, because he'd been too busy with a merger to shop for engagement rings himself. I'd worn it through architecture school finals, through my licensing exam, through the births of our daughter, through 7 years of family dinners, where Eleanor's empty chair accused us all of forgetting too quickly. I'd worn it yesterday in the bank mainframe room. I'd worn it this morning reviewing Vivian's testimony. I wasn't going to wear it tonight. The ring slid off easily, too easily maybe after all these years. It left a pale indent on my finger, a ghost mark where metal had pressed against skin for so long that the flesh had forgotten its original shape. I held the ring for exactly 3 seconds, feeling its weight one last time. Then I walked to the dresser and dropped it into the jewelry tray with the pearl earrings and the tennis bracelet and all the other gilded accessories of the life I'd lived as Mrs. Desmond Prescott. It made a small sound when it hit the velvet lining. Not a crash, not dramatic, just a quiet click of metal against fabric, and then it was done. I turned to the full-length mirror. The woman looking back wore a white suit sharp as a blade. Her wedding ring lay discarded in a tray, like evidence no longer needed. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that revealed the architecture of her face. The strong jaw, the precise cheekbones, the eyes that had spent 82 days documenting every detail of her husband's destruction. She looked like the architect Desmond had tried to erase. She looked like Eleanor's ghost made manifest. She looked like war. Downstairs, I heard Desmond's footsteps in the hallway. He was humming something, probably the jazz tune the pianist always played at the Prescott Capitol holiday party, getting ready for what he thought was a routine year-end board meeting, a formality before his coronation as chairman. Upstairs, dressed in white armor he'd once dismissed as too aggressive, I smiled at my reflection. The architect of his destruction was ready for the arena. The arena was the Malibu Cliff Resort Launch Pavilion. We'd driven separately. Desmond in his Tesla, me in a hired car that gave me time to rehearse silence. At 8:58 on New Year's Eve, Desmond's voice boomed across the pavilion to 2,000 guests beneath a California sky turning purple with dusk. 40 countries were streaming live. The massive LED screens behind him displayed architectural renderings of the resort he believed would crown his legacy. He had no idea his empire was about to detonate on global broadcast. "Family is the foundation of everything great we build," Desmond declared, his voice carrying practiced warmth. "My wife Saskia, my daughter Ivy, they are the bedrock of this vision." I stood in the wings wearing the white suit he'd dismissed as too aggressive, watching him gesture toward the empty seat reserved for me in the front row. The seat I hadn't taken. Darlene Hutchins appeared at my elbow, tablet glowing. 2,000 guests, 40 countries streaming live. Perfect. I nodded to the technical director at Master Control. "Run slot 1, I said quietly. The LED screens flickered. Desmond was mid-sentence when the resort renderings vanished. 3 seconds of black screen. Then a date appeared, October 10th, 2025. Audio crackled through the sound system. My voice from 82 days ago, Desmond. His voice answering, "Just finishing a call, darling." Then the woman's laugh, her words amplified for 2,000 witnesses. "When does the wife find out you're leaving her?" Desmond froze on stage, his microphone still live, the global feed still broadcasting. I watched his face shift from confusion to recognition to the first flicker of fear. Slot 2. Server footage. Timestamp 1:17 a.m. October 18th. Desmond typing commands to frame Vivian Ballard for transfers he'd authorized himself. Slot 3 banking records showing systematic transfers from Ivy's education trust fund to offshore accounts. Our 8-year-old daughter's future siphoned away in increments he'd thought I wouldn't notice. Slot 4. Video through Ivy's bedroom door, November 3rd. Our daughter's voice small and broken. Why doesn't Daddy want to have dinner with me anymore? The timestamp showing Desmond laughing on a video call with his mistress 1 floor below. The pavilion had gone silent, 2,000 people watching a man dissolve in real time. Slot 5 Vivian Ballard's face filled the screen's testimony recorded 3 days ago. He told me to use my credentials, Vivian said, her voice steady. He commanded every deletion. I have the messages, all of them. I watched Desmond's face as the 5th screen played. This was the moment, the precise instant when he realized the foundation he'd claimed was crumbling. Not because I'd attacked it, because I was the foundation and I had simply stepped away. Slot 6 Clayton Mercer appeared on screen recorded this morning. All Malibu development accounts frozen under federal compliance, Clayton stated with clinical precision. Every transaction documented, every wire transfer traced. Slot 7, Walter Prescott stood from the front row and walked to the stage, his microphone activated. As controlling shareholder by proxy, I hereby remove Desmond Prescott from all executive positions effective immediately, Walter said, his 80-year-old voice carrying the weight of 7 decades in power. The board vote is unanimous. Behind Walter, 2 men in dark suits moved toward the stage, not security. Federal investigators, the ones Thane had quietly briefed 3 days ago about Margaret's accident and the Naples, Florida bank records. That investigation would take months, but it had begun. Desmond's mouth moved. No sound emerged. The microphone had been cut Darlene's team following the production cue I'd scripted weeks ago. I turned away from the stage and walked toward the backstage suite where Malcolm Kingsley and Thane Dalton were waiting. Behind me, 2,000 people sat in shocked silence, while the global feed captured Desmond Prescott's public annihilation. Malcolm stood when I entered. Thane was already pouring champagne 3 glasses, as if he'd known exactly how this would end. The IP blueprints, the client contracts, the design team, I said without preamble. I transferred everything to my independent studio 3 weeks ago. Malibu isn't destroyed, it just doesn't belong to him anymore. Malcolm's neutral expression cracked into something that might have been admiration. $60 million backs the architect, not the thief, he said. Exclusive partnership effective January 1st. Thane handed me a champagne flute. What did he get? An empty shell and a federal investigation. Everything else was mine to begin with. I'd spent 7 years designing buildings, understanding that a structure doesn't collapse when you attack it directly. It collapses when you remove the load-bearing elements that held it up all along. Desmond had built his empire on my designs, my client relationships, my architectural vision. He'd just never bothered to notice that foundations can choose to shift. I wasn't his victim, I was his foundation. And foundations, when properly engineered, can be extracted and relocated intact. The New Year's countdown filtered through the backstage walls. 10, 9, 8. Malcolm raised his glass. To the architect. 7, 6, 5. I touched my flute to his crystal, making a sound like a small bell. Through the wall monitor, I could see Desmond frozen on stage, security moving toward him, the global feed still broadcasting. 4, 3, 2. To foundations, I said. 1. The crowd erupted in cheers. 2,000 people celebrating a new year, unaware they'd just witnessed the methodical destruction of a man who'd believed his wife was too demure to fight back. I walked out of the pavilion at 12:03 a.m., January 1st. My white suit was unmarred. The Malibu empire sat intact in the digital briefcase on my tablet, complete IP portfolio, elite client network, exclusive design team. 60 million in confirmed backing. My daughter safe with my mother in upstate New York, protected from the fallout. Behind me, Desmond stood in the wreckage of his own stage. Frozen accounts, federal investigation, empty corporate shell, public humiliation broadcast to 40 countries. I didn't pull him down. I simply stopped being his foundation. And to you listening to my story, remember this: the person you trust most should never make you question your own worth. Don't make my mistake. I spent 15 years being so focused on building beautiful things for other people that I forgot to protect what was mine. I ignored the small signs because I didn't want to believe someone I loved could betray me so completely. I told myself that trust meant never questioning, never checking, never protecting myself. That's not trust, that's willful blindness. The lesson I learned is this: you can love someone deeply and still maintain your own foundation. You can be loyal without being naive. You can give your whole heart without giving away your power. When someone shows you who they are through their actions, closed doors, late night calls, sudden secrecy, believe what you're seeing. Trust your instincts. They're usually right long before your heart is ready to accept the truth. And I believe God allowed me to discover the truth when I did for a reason, not a moment too early, not a moment too late, but exactly when I had the strength to face it and the clarity to act. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between staying silent or standing up for yourself? Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, or if you know someone who needs to hear this message, please share it with them. And if you haven't already, subscribe to her drama stories for more real accounts of courage, survival, and finding strength when everything falls apart. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time and presence mean everything to me. One final note: some elements of this story have been fictionalized for storytelling purposes and to emphasize the message. What matters most is the lesson we can all take from it.